The protagonist of our story is the strongest martial arts master in history. After successfully defeating the emperors of the demonic clans and restoring peace to the world, he was treated as a nuisance and exiled to serve as a teacher in a clan where no one knew his true identity. There, he was tasked with training the worst team in the clan. Upon learning the story of each member of this team, he decided to teach them earnestly. What obstacles will he face on his journey, and will he succeed in turning these failures into powerful warriors? This is what we will discover in today's story. In ancient times, during the golden age of martial arts and its practitioners, the first war erupted in this world, resembling a living hell on earth. This war came to be known as the Bloody Clan War, the greatest calamity faced by the Heavenly Alliance since its founding. The leader of the Bloody Clan, a man named Jai Hong Chun, was akin to a true monster in every sense of the word. No one in the entire Heavenly Sect could confront him or stand in his way. However, miraculously, the Heavenly Sect managed to emerge victorious in that bloody war. In the end, the tyrant Jai Hong Chun was defeated, but the identity of the person who defeated him remained a mystery, believed to be the strongest among the group. This individual was none other than the martial artist Mo Baek, the hero of our story today. This scenario is based on memories shared between two individuals in a castle in China. They are Commander Mu Yung Jinho of the Great Dragon Unit and Master Zhu Ryongguan, Pying Doyle. Commander Mu Yung appeared incredulous at what he was hearing, especially upon learning that the leader of Mo Baek's squad was the one who defeated the Bloody Clan's leader. Master Doyle responded, affirming that he understood Mu Yung's disbelief, as even he, who had witnessed the event firsthand, felt a sense of strangeness and incomprehension. The astonishment remained etched on Mu Yung's face, prompting Master Doyle to explain further that, years later, the second war broke out, known as the Demonic Sect War. This time, the righteous factions united to combat the Demonic Sect and put an end to its menace. If the Bloody Clan War was akin to hell, then the Demonic Sect War was a pit of suffering. Mu Yung replied, stating that the leader of the Demonic Sect, Seok Wansu, was even more brutal and criminal than the leader of the Bloody Clan. He then asked Master Doyle if he knew who had killed the leader of the Demonic Sect. Surprised, Mu Yung exclaimed that it was inconceivable for the same person to have killed the Bloody Clan leader as well. Master Doyle confirmed this to be true. With agitation, Mu Yung declared it was impossible to believe such a thing. Laughing, Master Doyle explained that this was why those who knew the truth never spoke of it, adding that he doubted even 20 people in the martial arts world were aware of this fact. Mu Yung continued to look at him in disbelief, saying he could never accept such a claim, but asked why Master Doyle had suddenly brought up the topic. Master Doyle replied that the person they were discussing was on his way to Zhu Ryongguan. Mu Yung was even more shocked and asked if he was serious. Master Doyle confirmed this, but clarified that he was not entirely certain, as the information came from higher authorities. He added that this individual had already been appointed as a regular trainer for the Great Dragon Unit. Mu Yung was further stunned and questioned why this location was chosen specifically, and why the Great Dragon Unit in particular. Mu Yung was unable to grasp the weight of this information, overwhelmed with confusion, and felt that what was about to happen would be a disaster of epic proportions. After all, the man who had killed both the leader of the Bloody Clan and the leader of the Demonic Sect was about to serve directly under his command. The following morning, deep in the forests leading to the Zhu Ryongguan Palace, a lone figure was running at an astonishing speed, defying the wind. He raced through the dense forests at incredible speed until he reached the path leading to his destination. Stopping at the edge of the cliff, he gazed at the scene below. Mo Baek stood gazing at the training facility of the Righteous Clan's alliance, known as Zhu Ryongguan, recalling the moment he received the decision appointing him as a regular instructor for the Great Dragon Unit under Zhu Ryongguan's supervision. He was taken aback by this decision, feeling an overwhelming sense of rejection, and demanded to know the reason behind such a sudden decree with seriousness and firmness. However, Gong Sun Dank Yong, the head of the Sky Eye Division, appeared flustered and unable to provide a clear explanation. In contrast, the Judicial Hall Master, Yuna Kia, spoke bluntly, stating that this decision was a punishment for a grave mistake committed by Mo Baek. Yuna clarified that this punishment was fitting for his actions. Mo Baek responded by demanding a logical and transparent explanation for the accusations leveled against him, but Yunha shouted back, accusing him of being disrespectful and lacking decorum. He added that a hierarchical system of ranks was in place, and that Mo Baek needed to show more respect for it. He also noted that Mo Baek's rank as one of the top 50 did not grant him the liberty to act in a manner unbecoming of his position. Growing more irate, Mo Baek pressed them to state the charge against him that had led to such a punishment. Yuna retorted angrily, saying it didn't matter since the orders were clear and irreversible. Finally, they revealed the charge: assaulting a superior officer. Mo Baek was utterly shocked, as he had never committed such an act. He defended himself, asserting that he had never raised his hand against any superior. Gong Sun then pointed out that a superior was not limited to just a commander. Yuna was surprised by Gong Sun's intervention in the conversation. At that point, Mo Baek firmly stated that he would not admit to something that never happened, emphasizing that he had not attacked anyone. Furthermore, he added that if things continued this way, he might actually resort to violence. The leaders were stunned by the seriousness of his tone, realizing he was not joking. Yuna shouted furiously, claiming that Mo Baek had lost his mind to speak to them in such a manner, but Mo Baek retorted mockingly that he didn't care what Yuna thought, adding that he was already considering assaulting his superiors. Enraged, Yuna shouted, questioning how a man from a third-tier sect could act so arrogantly just because the commander favored him. Preparing to attack, Yuna declared that it was the perfect chance to teach Mo Baek a lesson in manners and put him back in his place. Yuna launched a fierce martial strike, aiming directly at Mo Baek, who remained motionless. When Mo Baek noticed the incoming fist, he recognized it as the falling fist technique used by the Kunlun clan members. Without hesitation, he launched a counterattack. channeling energy into his legs, to the point where the surrounding stones shattered, creating a massive whirlwind. Yuna was stunned by the sheer power of Mobayek's technique, while Mobayek dismissed it as utterly trivial. Yuna took a powerful blow to his abdomen, which instantly incapacitated him and halted his attack. Mobayek stood unmoved, unharmed, and in complete control. Gongsun remained silently observing the scene without intervening. Yuna lost consciousness, hurtling backward and slamming into the wall, defeated before the fight even began. Mobayek turned toward him with a mocking tone, saying they had only been warming up and hadn't truly started the fight. Gongsun stepped in, attempting to de-escalate the situation, urging Mobayek to calm down. However, Mobayek, at the height of his anger, shouted at Yunha, daring him to say another word. Not stopping there, Mobayek charged at Yunha again, striking him with even greater intensity. After the heated confrontation, Mobayek spoke with Commander Gongsun, who shared his perspective on the current state of the alliance. Gongsun explained that a large number of leaders opposed Mobayek's presence and outright refused to acknowledge him, adding that his stay there would only lead to further conflicts. He informed him that the decision to assign him to the Juriang Guan sect had already been approved by the commander. Mobayek, seething with anger, remarked that everyone seemed intent on getting rid of him. Gongsun responded sorrowfully, admitting that even from his perspective, the decision was unjust, and expressing his deep regret that someone as exceptional as Mobayek, with his unique abilities, was being abandoned and left with no opportunities to advance. Mobayek closed his eyes in anguish, resigning himself to the fact that, as Gongsun had said, the matter was already settled. He recalled Gongsun's words about how the commitments and restrictions of the Supreme Council would soon resume after the war, leaving him powerless to stand against them. Gongsun added that the current circumstances might make their next meeting unlikely, due to interference from the great families and major sects, which would only create further obstacles. At that moment, Mobayek expressed his disappointment in the Heavenly Alliance, which had fallen under the control of these corrupt forces. During this time, the commander made a special request of Mobayek, who was prepared to do anything for his leader and mentor. As they continued their conversation, Gongsun asked Mobayek if he intended to carry out the orders and go to the designated location. Mobayek, irritated, replied that if his disappearance would resolve everyone's issues, he would simply vanish. Noticing Mobayek's frustration, Gongsun shifted the subject and asked if he was aware of the duties of the Great Dragon Unit. The narrative then returned to the present, where Mobayek found himself in the Sandwall Fortress, built to protect the region from monsters. The Great Dragon Unit was a military faction supporting the Heavenly Alliance's Monster Suppression Corps, known as the Bongma Corps, stationed in that area. Mobayek's mind remained occupied with recent events, and he felt little enthusiasm for the idea of becoming a mere instructor. His thoughts were interrupted when he overheard people discussing the start of the recruitment season for cannon fodder, and the selection process for the Great Dragon Unit at Juriang Guan. The talk suggested that while their salaries were not excessively low, they were insufficient compensation for risking their lives. Mobayek believed the solution lay in leader Su Hyung's ability to bring about change. With a deep sigh of resignation, Mobayek accepted the notion that he was destined to become an instructor, tasked with training individuals considered nothing more than cannon fodder, blaming the elderly officials who had sent him to this place and this grim fate. Upon arriving at the training facility, he was greeted by the site's leaders, Master Doyle and instructor Mu Yung. Master Doyle welcomed him, remarking that it had been a long time since they last met, and inquired about his well-being. He added that Mobayek's assignment there indicated that the alliance was in a state of turmoil. Mobayek replied that he cared little for such matters. Master Doyle then asked him for a favor, requesting that he remain calm and peaceful during his stay at Juriang Guan. Mobayek responded to Master Doyle, saying that he had always been calm and peaceful, and that hostility always originated from others. Master Doyle nodded and advised him to be cautious and avoid stirring up any trouble. Internally, Master Doyle reflected on how the fact that someone from a third-tier sect, like Mobayek, was one of the closest confidants of the Heavenly Alliance's leader, was, in itself, a significant issue. This situation made Mobayek a thorn in the side of the 5 great families and the 9 core sects, and it would be better for both him and the Alliance if he remained hidden and stable here. Mobayek asked Master Doyle about the nature of the Great Dragon Unit's duties, mentioning that he had heard people describe them as cannon fodder. Master Doyle replied that the description wasn't entirely wrong, as the survival rate was only about 5%, effectively making their training akin to preparing people for death. Mobayek was shocked by such a low figure and expressed his frustration, saying they had chosen the worst possible place to send him. Master Doyle continued, explaining that 100 people were selected each year, with nearly anyone being accepted for the position. After 2 years of training, they were deployed to their missions. Addressing Leader Mu Yung, Mobayek asked if this meant he would be sent with them in 2 years. Leader Mu Yung denied it, clarifying that the Great Dragon Unit was only responsible for training at Juriang Guan. Mobayek sighed in exasperation, remarking that even this place felt like a boring hell. Leader Mu Yung was taken aback by Mobayek's bluntness, while Master Doyle said that it was late, and they should escort him to his quarters so he could rest. Once they arrived at Mobayek's accommodations, Master Doyle and Leader Mu Yung stayed behind, conversing. Leader Mu Yung mentioned that, as a regular instructor, Mobayek would need to form a team, or they would face a shortage of trainers. Master Doyle sighed, calling it an additional burden, then added that among the new trainees in the Great Dragon Unit, there were individuals who were highly problematic. Instructor Mu Yung agreed, noting that he had already observed several such individuals. Master Doyle suggested assigning those problematic trainees to instructor Mobayek. Leader Mu Yung was surprised and questioned whether this decision was appropriate, and how the Alliance would react. Master Doyle replied that Mobayek claimed to be calm, and that the real issue lay with those around him. He added that it was time to test that claim, and see if Mobayek was truly uncontrollable or not. The next morning, Mo Bayek awoke from a deep sleep, thinking that life here might not be as bad as he had imagined. 3 days after his arrival at Juryongguan, Mo Bayek headed to the training grounds. He quickened his pace to avoid being late, aware that this was his first day as an instructor there. He knew he would be in charge of the 7th squad, and was curious about the nature of the individuals who would be his trainees. When he finally reached the assembly area, he found 5 individuals representing the 7th squad under his charge. These individuals appeared strong and stubborn, looking at Mo Bayek with dismissive and mocking gazes. The moment Mo Bayek saw the trainees, he immediately realized they were troublemakers, and knew his peace in this place would be far from reach. He also noticed that their auras felt strangely familiar to him, but he wondered why individuals with such capabilities would end up in the Great Dragon Unit, which was meant for training cannon fodder. Deciding to investigate, he used the Infinite Radiant Wheel Eye skill to analyze the energy flow within their bodies, as well as the nature of their auras and abilities. During his assessment, he observed that the first trainee had a relaxed stance and balanced steps, indicating that he had learned whip techniques unique to the Tang clan. However, Mo Bayek suspected he lacked talent. Moving to the second trainee, he discovered that this individual was from the Chongnan sect. Meanwhile, the young girl, despite her age, was unmistakably from the Yun clan, appearing talented and full of promise. The final trainee, however, was the most surprising. Mo Bayek realized that this individual had never trained in martial arts at all. It dawned on Mo Bayek that he had been deceived, and that the leaders of Juryongguan had deliberately put him in a challenging situation to get rid of him. He felt a surge of anger, especially since he had made it clear from the beginning that he wanted no trouble, and desired only a quiet life. The trainees, growing bored of his silence, asked him who he was. Introducing himself, he stated that he was Mo Bayek and had been assigned as the exclusive instructor for the 7th squad of the Great Dragon Unit. Later that evening, Master Doyle requested a meeting with Mo Bayek and began reprimanding him for his behavior, asking if it was true that he had greeted the trainees and left. Mo Bayek confirmed this and asked if there was an issue. Struggling to maintain his composure, Master Doyle informed Mo Bayek that, as the instructor of the 7th squad, it was his responsibility to train the trainees, and that abandoning them as he had was unacceptable. Mo Bayek angrily retorted, calling the situation absurd and pointing out that he had immediately recognized 3 of the trainees as belonging to prestigious groups like the Tang clan, Yun clan, and Chongnan sect. He added that such individuals did not belong in a place meant for training people to die, and that 2 other children had been thrown in arbitrarily to fill the slots. Mo Bayek asked Master Doyle what he was expected to do in this scenario, whether he should nurture the 3 elites and send the other 2 to their inevitable doom. He expressed his frustration, saying he always knew the leaders were despicable, but this situation surpassed all reason. He also pointed out that the 3 families would constantly exert pressure to control their children, and that he was being used as a shield to protect them. Once again, he emphasized that he had made it clear from the start that he wanted no trouble. Master Doyle tried to calm him down and asked for a chance to explain the situation. He revealed that Tang Jinsan and Baek Lip Yang had been sent personally by the Tang clan's head and the Chongnan sect's leader, while Yun Ha had come of her own accord. This situation had put the leadership in a difficult position. Mo Bayek responded that he saw no logical reason or justification for this, and admitted he still couldn't comprehend the rationale behind it all. Continuing the conversation, Master Doyle explained to Mo Bayek that when he joined them, he was the only suitable candidate for the role. He pointed out that other instructors couldn't handle the interference and pressure from the Tang clan or the Chongnan sect. He elaborated that instructors in the Great Dragon Unit were considered some of the best in the mid-tier martial arts field, but he doubted their ability to train these particular students effectively, especially since they might easily favor the influential trainees. He added that regardless of the squad they joined, these 3 would continue causing problems, which would negatively impact the other trainees who didn't deserve such treatment. Mo Bayek responded sarcastically, saying that Master Doyle seemed overly concerned about children whose fate was death. Master Doyle replied that the survival rate was only 5%, and if they wanted to improve that figure even slightly, they needed to give their utmost effort. For that reason, they had gathered these 5 children and placed them under Mo Bayek's supervision, believing he was the only one capable of handling them. He added that Mo Bayek's presence here obligated him to fulfill his duties. However, Mo Bayek ignored him, walking away while saying that they should find someone else to take on this task, because he wouldn't do it. Master Doyle tried to pressure him, explaining that the matter concerned the future of these children. Mo Bayek hesitated upon hearing this, then began muttering curses under his breath, trying to convince himself to stay calm and avoid causing trouble. Master Doyle pulled out personal files from his pocket and handed them to Mo Bayek, explaining that they belonged to the 5 trainees. He informed him that Dan Mo Kun Ray had never trained in martial arts but had volunteered to join because of his desperate need for money. He added that many applicants shared similar motivations, so it wasn't surprising. He then mentioned that the young girl, Yun Ha Min, was from the Yun clan, and that he was the only one aware of this secret, requesting that Mo Bayek destroy her file after reading it. Master Doyle left, urging Mo Bayek to handle the situation better in the future. Filled with anger, Mo Bayek asked Master Doyle if he was serious about leaving him to train these children. Realizing he had no choice, Mo Bayek began reading the trainees' files, and quickly concluded that the task was indeed impossible. He reviewed Dan Mo Kun Ray and Yun Ha Min's files, discovering that both faced complex personal circumstances. After finishing Yun Ha Min's file, he burned it as Master Doyle had instructed, though this only deepened his frustration and resentment. While sitting in his office, Mo Bayek sensed strange auras coming from outside, and realized the trainees were the source. He quickly headed to the training grounds where they were gathered and angrily demanded to know why they were there, reminding them that he had ordered them to return to their quarters in the morning. The trainees were startled by his sudden appearance, shocked at their inability to detect him approaching. Mobek repeated his question, asking if this was an act of defiance against his orders. Trainee Dan Mo-kun Ray responded that he couldn't leave. Another trainee followed, saying he wished to leave but that his father would send him back if he tried to escape, adding that the distance from Wuchang to Sichuan was far too great. The other two remained silent. Mobek sighed, understanding their situations and acknowledging he couldn't argue with them. He then asked if they had eaten anything since the morning. They replied that they hadn't eaten and had been waiting for him all day. Shocked, Mobek asked angrily if they had really been standing there since the morning. Feeling both exasperated and guilty, he realized these were just children he couldn't rely on, but his conscience compelled him to ensure they at least had something to eat. Since the Juryongguan restaurant was closed due to the late hour, Mobayak was forced to buy food for them himself. He instructed them to eat comfortably and ordered them to return to their rooms after finishing. The trainees thanked Mobayak sincerely and began eating immediately. As they ate, Mobayak felt irritated, realizing he was already bearing financial burdens for them before even receiving his salary. Mobak realized this was just the beginning of a string of troubles. Trainee Dan appeared overjoyed by the food, as this type of meal was entirely new to him. However, he struggled to swallow, feeling guilty for eating while his family was suffering from hunger. Tears welled up in Dan's eyes as he thought about how this food could feed his family for several days. Noticing Dan's expression, Mobak understood he was thinking about his family, a sentiment Mobak could relate to. He approached Dan and told him that whatever he ate now, he would prepare some food for him to take to his family. He asked Dan to enjoy his meal for the time being. Surprised and moved by his words, Dan's eyes filled with tears of joy, and he thanked Mobak warmly, leaving the other trainees puzzled by his emotions. Dan continued eating, but this time his tears were tears of gratitude and happiness. Learning that Dan's home was nearby, Mobek decided he should accompany him to deliver the food to his family. After finishing the meal, Mobayak and Dan set off toward his family's home, which was some distance away. Mobak asked Dan how far they had left to go, and Dan pointed to a distant location, saying his home was there. Looking toward the place, Mobak was stunned, realizing that Dan's home was not a proper house but merely a tiny shack. Inside the shack, Dan's family heard voices outside. Dan's younger sister asked their mother if the voice sounded like Dan's, but the mother replied that it was unlikely, as Dan was in the Great Dragon unit and couldn't possibly be there. The sister insisted she had heard his voice clearly. She was right, as Dan entered with a smile, announcing his return. His mother was astonished but quickly felt overjoyed, rushing to embrace him along with his sister. She asked Dan how he had managed to come back, pointing out that he had previously told them he wouldn't be able to visit for the first 3 months. Dan explained that he had been granted special permission for a short visit. The family noticed the box Dan was carrying and asked about its contents. Dan eagerly opened the box slowly, wanting to surprise them. His family waited with bated breath until Dan revealed a large quantity of food. They were astonished, exclaiming that they had never seen such food before. Their voices were so loud that Mobayak, standing outside, could hear them clearly. He also heard the mother asking Dan where he got such expensive food. Dan replied that his instructor had provided it as it was his first day of training. Dan felt immense happiness, growing more determined to do anything, even risk his life, to make his family happy. After spending time with his family, Dan returned with Mobayak, sharing his family's story along the way. He explained that his family was once prominent, but when he was 8 years old and his sister was still in their mother's womb, they suffered total annihilation during the war. He recounted how his mother barely managed to escape to Wuchang with him and his sister. Mobak listened silently, knowing these events had indeed occurred about 10 years ago. During a period when the martial arts world was in a state of chaos and devastation due to the war, Dan revealed that his family's downfall was the result of betrayal. Curious, Mobayak asked for details about the betrayal, to which Dan replied that it was the real reason he had joined the Great Dragon unit. He explained that it wasn't just about the money, but about his desire to grow stronger, as no other sect would accept him. The Great Dragon unit was the only place that gave him hope. He then emotionally pleaded with Mobayak not to ask him to return home again. Mobayak remained silent for a moment before asking Dan about his sister, noting that she appeared to be in poor health. Dan was surprised and asked how he knew. Mobak replied that he had his own ways of knowing. In truth, he had noticed her condition when the mother and sister came out to greet him, recognizing that she suffered from the 7 hidden veins disorder, a severe illness that, if untreated, could prevent her from living past the age of 20. Mobak asked Dan if they had consulted any doctors or healers about her condition. Dan replied that they had, but none were able to diagnose her properly, which was why he needed to join the Great Dragon unit, to earn money and strength to help her. Mobak felt troubled by Dan's words, knowing that remaining in the unit would eventually lead to Dan's death, no matter how hard he tried. Suddenly Dan stood up, telling Mobayak anxiously that the gates of Juryongguan would close at midnight, and if they were late, they wouldn't be able to enter. With irritation, Mobak remarked that this was an additional burden, and ordered Dan to run if he wanted to make it before the gates closed, unless he preferred to spend the night on the pavement. The following morning, Mobayak arrived at the training grounds early, but he appeared exhausted and worn out, as he hadn't had enough sleep after sneaking into Juryongguan the previous night while carrying an unconscious Dan. He had tried to avoid being detected by the guards, which had been extremely challenging. Mobak decided that if something similar happened again, he would never go through the ordeal again. When he finally reached the training grounds, he found the 5 trainees waiting for him as he had expected. He angrily demanded to know why they were still there, reminding them that he had been serious when he ordered them to return home the previous day. He added that they should leave while they still had the chance, as they didn't understand the true nature of Juryongguan. The trainees responded, explaining that they were fully aware of their current position and the situation situation they were in. Dan, however, felt uneasy and frustrated, as despite explaining his circumstances to Mo Bayek the day before, the instructor remained adamant that they should leave. Mo Bayek told the trainees he would play their game, then called Tang Jin-san forward. He asked if it wouldn't have been better for him to stay in Chengdu and continue being a pampered child. Jin-san was shocked by the question, and asked what Mo Bayek meant by such a comment. Mo Bayek replied that Jin-san and Baek Li-byung were nothing but a heavy burden on the other 3 trainees there, and that it would be better for them to leave this place and live a more comfortable life, rather than staying. Jin-san responded that it was his father's order, and if he returned home now, he would face severe punishment before being sent back again. Byung added that he too couldn't defy or disobey any orders from his sect leader, so returning home wasn't an option for him either. Mo Bayek cursed silently, realizing that neither would give up easily, and asked them if they were truly willing to stay here for 2 years, face the possibility of death, and if they fully understood what awaited them after this period. The trainees replied that they were, of course, aware that they would be sent beyond the Sandwall Fortress into the Sandwall Forest to eliminate any remnants of the bloody clan and the monsters they had created. Mo Bayek asked if they had any idea about the nature of the monsters and remnants they were talking about. Jin-san and Byung were caught off guard and unable to respond, so Mo Bayek answered for them, explaining that they clearly didn't know because the martial arts world referred to the place as the Land of Monsters. He mentioned that the survival rate for any group from the Great Dragon units was only 5%, meaning that out of 100 people, only 5 returned after 5 years. He further explained that no one knew the condition of those survivors, whether they would return with minor injuries, severe wounds, or even disfigurements. Mo Bayek asks the trainees how many of them think they could be among the 5 survivors. Internally, he continues cursing the elders of the council and the clan leaders for assigning the mission of purging the Sandwall Forest to the 9 major sects and 5 great families, solely as a way to test the strength of the 8 rising sects and their leaders. He considers it the worst decision possible, as they assumed that eliminating the Bloody Clan's leader and main forces would make the task simple, while in reality, the cursed Sandwall Forest is nothing less than a hellish domain. Mo Bayek tells the trainees that the truth about Sandwall Forest is hidden from them and everyone else, despite the council elders being fully aware of the situation. He then directs his words at Tang Jin-san, asserting that his father is no exception, and undoubtedly knows about the dangers of this place. He informs them that he will now reveal the hidden truth about a world they are entirely ignorant of. Mo Bayek begins explaining that the dark martial arts practiced by the Bloody Clan in this place turned it into a home for the Sajiangshi, or zombies, which continually appear. He adds that a friend who died yesterday could return today to block their path as a zombie, making the place truly cursed. He further notes that the curse doesn't affect humans alone, but also includes beasts and animals, which can transform into zombies at any moment. He clarifies that the zombies here are not ordinary. They include blood zombies and dark zombies, and any accursed type of zombie might emerge in these lands. Mo Bayek's explanation strikes the trainees like a thunderbolt. They are stunned and struggle to process what they've heard. They had always thought these stories were mere myths or folklore used to scare children. The idea of forests where cursed monsters continuously appear instills fear and terror in their hearts. Continuing his speech, Mo Bayek tells them that they are expected to be used as shields for the Bongma Corps during battles against zombies in this place. The students are shocked by this flood of information and ask their instructor how he knows all of it. Mo Bayek replies that a friend of his told him, but he emphasizes that the most important thing now is that they know the full truth. He asks if they are still determined to enter these lands after hearing everything. He explains that the decision they make now will determine the course of their lives, and asks them again whether they will choose to return home or not. After a moment of silence, Mo Bayek becomes irritated by their responses, considering them stubborn and futile, determined to become cannon fodder and march toward death willingly. He recalls when he addressed Dan directly, asking if he was prepared to see his mother and sister weep blood for him in 2 years. Dan responded that if he returned home now, he would be the one weeping blood before those 2 years even passed. Mo Bayek appreciates Dan's sentiment, understanding that if he were to leave the Great Dragon unit now, his family would likely starve before those 2 years were up. After giving up on trying to change the trainees' minds, Mo Bayek tells them that if they don't want to leave now, they can stay. He assures them their food, drink, and even salaries will be provided. However, he makes it clear that he has no intention of wasting his time on a group of foolish boys who are willing to embrace death so easily. Instead, they can train themselves in whatever manner they see fit. He labels this method self-training, telling them that if they've heard of independent learning, they can apply it now. With that, Mo Bayek leaves the area, abandoning them. Mo Bayek remains annoyed and agitated, convinced that he will no longer teach the trainees and no longer cares about what they do. Realizing his frustration stems from hunger, he decides it's time to eat. He returns to his trainees and tells them to join him for a meal. Urging them to hurry, he complains that they delayed his dinner the previous day when he had to feed them first. Dan looks at Mo Bayek with confusion over his lack of commitment to their training, but at the same time, he can't resist the prospect of eating. Mo Bayek enters the dining hall and sees the menu for the day, finding it excellent. He encourages the trainees to enter quickly, saying the food looks delicious. The aroma of the food fills the room as soon as they step inside, increasing Mo Bayek's anticipation. He notices that the presentation style of the dishes in this dining hall is quite different. As they enter, they draw attention, with everyone recognizing them as trainees from the Great Dragon Unit. People are surprised to see them there, as they are supposed to use the southern dining hall. Yunha attempts to explain to Mobaek that they aren't meant to use this dining hall, but the one located in the Tam Ryung South Wing. Mobaek dismisses her statement, saying it's nonsense, and that the rules allow them to use any Tam Ryung wing they wish. Yunha responds that this is the first time she's heard such a claim, but Mobaek confidently assures her he knows what he's talking about. Mobaek recalls a conversation with Master Doyle, who explained that he, as an instructor, was allowed to use any of the Tam Ryung wings, north, south, east, or west. However, this privilege was exclusive to him as an instructor, not the trainees. Still, Mobaek finds it absurd and illogical to send the trainees to the distant southern wing when the dining hall here is close and convenient. At that moment, another instructor arrives behind them, drawing the attention of the trainees, who call out to Mobaek to inform him. The instructor notices the emblem on their training uniforms and immediately recognizes them as members of the Great Dragon Unit. He appears both surprised and angry. The instructor, Sado Guang, the head instructor of the Jam Ryung Unit, asks why insignificant people from the Great Dragon Unit are in this place and what they want here. Mobaek tells his trainees to step aside and responds to Instructor Guang that this is a dining hall, and naturally, they're here to eat. Feigning indifference, he asks what the problem is with their presence. Instructor Guang becomes increasingly angry and introduces himself arrogantly as Sado Guang, head instructor of the Jam Ryung Unit, before challenging Mobaek to state his identity. Mobaek calmly replies, introducing himself as Ha Mobaek, instructor of the 7th Squad of the Great Dragon Unit. Guang laughs mockingly, saying that the Jam Ryung Unit received no notice or instructions about anyone from the Great Dragon Unit being here. Mockingly, Instructor Guang questions why an instructor from that unit is in the Eastern Dining Hall, pointing out that instructors are supposed to eat in the Northern Wing. Mobaek nonchalantly replies that he can eat wherever he wants. Guang's anger boils over as he demands to know how Mobaek dares to defy the rules that designate specific zones for each wing. He explains that the Jam Ryung Unit uses the Eastern Wing, the War Yang Unit uses the Western Wing, instructors and administrative staff use the Northern Wing, while laborers and the Great Dragon Unit use the Southern Wing. The trainees are surprised by this explanation. Although they had some knowledge of the division, they weren't fully aware of its specifics. Mobaek feels extremely irritated and struggles to keep his temper in check, particularly as he fails to understand the overconfidence of Instructor Guang. He finds it hard to believe that someone who doesn't even recognize his face could be this audacious. Instructor Guang continues his rant, demanding that Mobaek and his trainees leave immediately, accusing them of tainting the Tam Ryung East Wing with their presence. He implies that the presence of losers like them would be disastrous if the genius students of the Jam Ryung Unit picked up any of their traits. Mobaek's trainees feel deeply insulted by the harsh treatment, but Mobaek doesn't stay silent. He retorts, saying that if there's a disgusting stench in the air, it's coming from Guang himself. This angers Guang even further, who calls Mobaek a mere instructor from the Great Dragon Unit, and questions how he dares to insult him so blatantly. Mobaek provokes him further, asking why he's so confident, and what makes his position so important. As the tension between the two escalates, Instructor Jigyal Myung, another instructor from the Jam Ryung Unit, steps in to de-escalate the situation. Jigyal asks head instructor Guang to stop making a scene, separating Mobaek and Guang. Mobaek notices that Jigyal Myung is unfamiliar to him, increasing his curiosity. Speaking sternly, Jigyal Myung states that causing such a commotion in the dining hall is inappropriate behavior for instructors, especially with so many students watching them. Guang defends himself, saying Jigyal must not have heard the arrogant fool and how he spoke earlier, adding that Mobaek entered a place he didn't belong and acted as if he owned it. Mobaek retorts that the only fool here is the one who started a fight over nothing. Jigyal tries to calm the situation and urges them to stop talking this way. Mobaek finally recognizes Jigyal Myung and asks if he is indeed Jigyal Myung. Surprised, Jigyal asks if Mobaek actually knows him. Mobaek replies that he does, and that he knows Jigyal is from the Chio Nomuk Wing. Jigyal grows increasingly puzzled, realizing that Mobaek is aware of the Chio Nomuk Wing, a part of the Heavenly Alliance under the 4th branch known as the Military Wing. This affiliation is classified as 3rd-level secret information, making it highly unusual for Mobaek to know about it. Denying the claim, Jigyal says Mobaek must be mistaken or confused. Mobaek responds that he was certain, but is willing to accept that he might have been wrong. Instructor Guang, on the other hand, starts to realize that Mobaek's knowledge of the Chio Nomuk Wing is not ordinary, hinting that Mobaek might not be just a simple instructor. Jigyal moves closer to Guang, whispering that it's better to drop the matter for now, as escalating the situation could cause unnecessary problems, especially with so many people watching. Guang reluctantly agrees with Jigyal's suggestion, acknowledging that if Mobaek has backing or influence, it would be difficult to confront him, especially after all the effort Guang put into reaching his current position. Guang replies that since Jigyal insists, he'll let it go this time out of his kindness and mercy. He leaves, warning them not to repeat the incident, to which Mobaek remarks sarcastically that he expected him to retreat. Jigyal then advises Mobaek to stop stirring up trouble, to which Mobaek responds that he can't even start his day in peace. Jigyal sighs with relief that the situation ended without escalation, avoiding a major conflict. Mobaek calls out to his trainees, instructing them to grab their meals and sit down. The trainees follow his orders and begin eating. After they finish their meal, Mobaek notices that Jigyal Myung is still standing outside. He asks him why he's lingering and if he's had his meal yet, adding a comment about how today's meat was dry and tough to chew. Jigyal retorts that Mo Baek doesn't seem like a normal instructor, and, instead of just feeding his trainees, he should also teach them martial arts. Mo Baek counters that Jigyal is the last person qualified to say that, pointing out that he often leaves his own trainees to figure things out on their own. Jigyal grows angrier, accusing Mo Baek of seizing every opportunity to criticize him. Mo Baek responds dismissively, saying that martial arts are simple, and, given the 5% survival rate, it doesn't matter how well trained the trainees are, they're likely to die anyway. Jigyal challenges him, saying that if he's so confident, he should send his own trainees instead. Frustrated, Jigyal exclaims that it's impossible to reason with Mo Baek, angrily emphasizing that an instructor's duty is to do everything possible to ensure their trainees are among the 5% who survive. He accuses Mo Baek of being rude and cowardly for abandoning his trainees to their fate based on such thinking. Jigyal points to himself, declaring that even if he were an amateur, he would never be a failure or a coward like Mo Baek. Mo Baek laughs at Jigyal's accusations of cowardice and failure. As he considers Jigyal's personality, known as a respected and disciplined squad leader, he acknowledges Jigyal's excessive pride in the 5 great families, but also his humility, diligence, and overall good character. This moment prompts Mo Baek to reconsider his stance and contemplate trying Jigyal's approach. At Ju Ryongguan's training grounds, Mo Baek arrives loudly, yelling at Jin San for using his whip like he's dancing instead of training. He then turns to Dan, instructing him to straighten his back and stop clenching his knees so tightly. The trainees are stunned to see Mo Baek in the training grounds, unable to believe that their instructor has finally decided to train them after all the struggles. Addressing all of them, Mo Baek announces that the self-training phase is over as of today. Before heading to the training grounds, Mo Baek had gone to Master Doyle to ask if there were any specific martial arts techniques that all Ju Ryongguan trainees were required to learn. Master Doyle confirmed this, explaining that trainees from other squads were learning basic martial arts techniques. Mo Baek asked why Doyle hadn't informed him of this earlier. Master Doyle replied that the manuals distributed on the first day contained the required techniques, such as Ju Ryongguan's mental development technique, its signature sword techniques, or its styles of punches, kicks, and footwork. Interrupting irritably, Mo Baek dismissed these techniques as useless, calling their names mere embellishments. Master Doyle kept his composure and replied that most members of the Great Dragon Unit couldn't even master one of these useless techniques. He questioned whether Mo Baek thought the Jamryung or Waryong units needed to learn such techniques, answering himself that they didn't, and even if they had to, they would master them effortlessly. Doyle added that the heirs of noble families and students of prestigious sects had already learned these skills long ago, and he hoped that Mo Baek's trainees might surprise him. However, he also warned that even basic combat methods could be extremely challenging for them, and mastering even one skill would be an achievement. Mo Baek remained silent, internally acknowledging the truth of Master Doyle's words. Back in the training grounds, Mo Baek instructs the trainees to pay close attention. He tells them he will now teach them the fundamental martial arts techniques of Ju Ryongguan, sparking visible excitement among the trainees. He explains that these techniques are very basic, and some of them might have already learned or used them before. He begins listing the techniques: Ju Ryong mental development, Ju Ryong sword art, Ju Ryong fist art, and Ju Ryong footwork. Mo Baek clarifies that these 4 techniques are essentially different forms of the 3 talent-based arts. He notices Dan's amazed expression and realizes that Dan has no prior knowledge of this world, meaning he will have to start from scratch with him. Mo Baek asks the other trainees if they also want to learn these fundamental techniques. Byung replies that he has already learned these techniques during his foundational training in his sect. Jin San comments that he has learned them too, though they are slightly different from what Mo Baek is teaching. Yunha surprises everyone by admitting that she has never learned martial arts in her life. The trainees are stunned by Yunha's revelation and ask if she really means she has never learned any martial arts style before. Mo Baek is also surprised, wondering how a daughter of the Yun clan could have no martial arts training, which leads him to decide to assess each trainee's level individually. Jin San decides he will try learning these techniques as well, stating that it won't interfere with what he has already mastered. Mo Baek responds that if that's the case, everyone will participate in the training this time, and those with experience will help their peers. Determined to execute this training properly, Mo Baek begins the session. Meanwhile, the head instructor Guang observes them from a distance, filled with resentment, eager to see if the Great Dragon Unit's lessons are worth the attention they've been getting. Mo Baek starts by teaching them the mental development technique, explaining that it is the foundation of everything. Practicing this technique properly will help them build a moderate amount of internal energy. The trainees focus on their breathing and work on controlling their internal energy. Mo Baek observes that 2 of them are already skilled and able to manage their energy flow, while Dan and Yunha struggle significantly with breathing and energy control. He realizes that these 2 will require a considerable amount of effort, and he is unsure where to begin. Mo Baek warns the trainees not to underestimate the talent-based arts, explaining that they are rooted in profound principles. He decides that instead of teaching them the cliched fundamentals of Ju Ryongguan, he will teach them the basics of the 3 talent-based arts. He instructs them to focus on inhaling and exhaling, but Dan and Yunha appear completely lost. At that moment, Mo Baek senses an additional presence and realizes it is instructor Guang, who approaches him angrily. Guang furiously questions whether Mo Baek is implying that Ju Ryongguan's martial arts are nothing more than a failed imitation of the 3 talent-based arts. He yells in protest, declaring that such statements are unacceptable from someone who calls himself an instructor at Ju Ryongguan. Mo Baek looks at Guang with confusion, wondering why this man always seems to appear just to annoy him. He recalls that Guang is the head instructor, so it's natural for him to be troublesome. Responding boldly, Mobek states that he is in the middle of teaching and will not allow anyone to interfere or disrupt the learning process. Instructor Guang is taken aback by Mobek's audacity, retorting that he couldn't simply ignore the nonsense Mobek had spouted in front of the students. He points out that other trainees had also overheard Mobek's ridiculous statements. Mobek calmly responds that he doesn't need to consider what other students hear during his lessons, asserting that this is his class and his squad, and he won't allow anyone to interfere with his methods. Guang's anger intensifies, and he shouts that the fundamental martial arts techniques that Mobek insulted were personally developed by him, giving him every right to intervene. Realizing that Guang's anger stems from his insult to techniques he had created, Mobek notes that while Guang might be talented, he hasn't yet reached his peak. Mobek responds coldly and provocatively, saying he now understands why those techniques are so weak and ridiculous. Those watching the exchange are stunned, finding it hard to believe that anyone would speak to head instructor Guang in such a manner, especially a mere instructor from the Great Dragon Unit. Guang snaps back at Mobek angrily, questioning how such an insolent person dares to insult him, and threatens that Mobek will face the consequences of his words. Guang challenges Mobek to prove his claims that Juriong Guan's martial arts techniques are useless. Mobek, with confidence, asks why there's so much fuss in the Great Dragon Unit, and declares that he will personally demonstrate the worthlessness of these techniques. He invites Guang to follow him, further provoking his anger and making Guang believe Mobek is arrogant without cause. Mobek and Guang head to the training grounds, where trainees eagerly gather, excited to witness a real fight between their instructors. Everyone abandons their lessons to watch the anticipated duel. Mobek's trainees feel anxious, unsure of what to do, especially since escalating the matter could result in their expulsion. However, Jin-san sees this as a good opportunity to witness their instructor's strength and abilities firsthand. As Mobek and Guang take their positions in the combat area, they stand face to face, ready to fight. Once they are in place, Dan announces the start of the duel, prompting Mobek to comment on the unexpectedly large crowd that has gathered. Mobek remarks that the fight can be considered an educational demonstration of combat techniques, which makes it acceptable. He signals for Guang to begin the fight, granting him the first move and sarcastically adding that he'll allow Guang 3 full seconds to act freely. Guang, provoked by Mobek's words, rushes toward him with incredible speed, channeling a massive amount of energy into his hands, vowing to see if this arrogant man can still talk after the next few moments. Guang unleashes a powerful aura of energy that everyone present can clearly feel. In a flash, he attacks Mobek with tremendous speed, but Mobek doesn't even flinch from his position. Guang unleashes a series of violent punches, yet Mobek evades them effortlessly, barely exerting any effort. The spectators are captivated by Mobek's performance, watching as he continues to dodge Guang's strikes with astonishing agility. Guang, realizing that this approach isn't working, gathers his energy again and aims a decisive blow at Mobek. Mobek, however, dodges the attack with extraordinary ease, prompting Guang to unleash a barrage of relentless strikes that no ordinary fighter could avoid. Yet, Mobek remains composed, dodging each assault with exceptional skill and confidence. Calmly, Mobek looks at Guang and, in stark contrast to the intensity of the battle, says, "Only 1 second has passed." Guang is stunned by Mobek's remark, suddenly realizing that Mobek has been keeping track of the time since the start of the duel. The fight continues, growing increasingly intense as instructor Guang delivers punches and kicks with relentless ferocity. Mobek, however, effortlessly evades almost every attack, maintaining his stance that he will not retaliate until 3 seconds have passed since the duel began. Guang is astounded, unable to comprehend how someone can match his strength so easily. Despite this, Mobek remains smiling, dodging Guang's attacks, and informs him that 2 seconds have already passed. Both fighters take a brief moment to step back, while the trainees watch in awe and disbelief. Dan is overwhelmed with excitement, seeing such a fight for the first time, unable to fully grasp what is happening. Even Byung, who is accustomed to witnessing battles, feels disoriented as he struggles to follow their movements due to their incredible speed. The trainees are filled with a sense of pride mixed with amazement, realizing that this formidable individual is their instructor. Finally, after a short but fierce exchange, Mobek pushes Guang back and retreats with ease. He smiles confidently, casting a sharp, arrogant glance at Guang, and declares that the 3 seconds have officially passed. Both Mobek and Guang cease their attacks, locking eyes in a tense moment of silence. Everyone, from trainees to spectators, waits anxiously to see what will happen next. Mobek turns to his trainees, instructing them to carefully observe his movements from now until the end of the fight, explaining that he will demonstrate the 3-talent fist technique. He further declares that he will not use any internal energy during this fight. Hearing this, Instructor Guang becomes enraged, furious at Mobek's continued provocations and insults. Guang is deeply embarrassed by the situation, especially in the presence of the first-year Jamryung unit trainees, and feels compelled to save face. Determined, he decides to employ the infinite family technique, while Mobek calmly states that it's time to show him the true form of the 3-talent fist. Guang's frustration grows with Mobek's excessive confidence and arrogance, and he decides that there's no reason to hold back in dealing with this insolent man. Guang announces that he will now use his most powerful technique, the crushing rock dance. Mobek chuckles to himself, acknowledging that although the SA family is a modest military clan, the crushing rock dance is an advanced and commendable technique. However, the trainees find it odd that Guang is using his ultimate technique against someone who has openly declared declared he won't use internal energy. While they consider it excessive, they also recognize that someone who has endured 3 seconds of Guang's aggressive techniques is no ordinary individual. Pushing himself forward with all his might, Guang is determined to regain his honor and dispel his sense of humiliation. He launches a swift and brutal assault on Mo Bayek, who remains unmoving. Despite the barrage of rapid consecutive strikes, Mo Bayek dodges every single one without exception. No matter how hard Guang tries with his violent and relentless attacks, none of them land on Mo Bayek. Mo Bayek begins to notice that Guang's speed and strength have changed significantly. Observing Guang's movements, Mo Bayek identifies the source of these differences in his fighting style. He realizes that Guang has made modifications to the 3-talent fist technique by incorporating elements from another, incompatible fist technique. As a result, the skill has become unbalanced and unrefined, leaving it riddled with vulnerabilities. Instructor Guang grows increasingly frustrated, unable to understand why his energy and attacks have no effect on Mo Bayek. Mo Bayek, observing Guang's techniques, notes their lack of execution and integration. Turning to his trainees, he explains that any alterations to combat techniques, if not mastered fully, will create significant weaknesses, as seen in this fight. The trainees are astonished by their instructor's ability to lecture them during such an intense battle. Finally, Mo Bayek decides to shift to the offensive and tells his trainees to watch closely and observe every detail. He moves swiftly toward Guang, explaining to his trainees that by exploiting weaknesses precisely, internal energy becomes far less necessary. Utilizing his incredible speed, Mo Bayek unleashes a rapid series of precise strikes at Guang, landing blows on multiple critical points, leaving Guang unable to evade any of them. Guang attempts to retaliate, but his attacks fail to land as Mo Bayek effortlessly avoids them with his superior speed. Mo Bayek continues targeting specific vital points on Guang's body, explaining to his trainees that focusing on such points makes attacks far more effective, even without internal energy. He emphasizes that understanding the finer details of the 3-talent fist simplifies combat greatly. Mo Bayek delivers the final strike with precision and confidence, completely disrupting Guang's balance and leaving him unable to continue fighting. Guang collapses to the ground in an instant, while Mo Bayek stands unscathed. Looking at the defeated instructor, Mo Bayek tells his trainees that it is as simple as he demonstrated. Guang feels humiliated and ashamed but is unable to stand as his energy has been entirely drained. The trainees are left in awe and disbelief at what they have just witnessed. Guang begins coughing up blood, the result of the precise strikes to his vital points. All he can think about is how he failed to avoid the blows of someone who didn't even use internal energy, yet managed to disable him with astounding accuracy, rendering him incapable of controlling his own energy. The trainees, now exhilarated, express their admiration for Mo Bayek. Dan shouts in amazement, declaring that Mo Bayek is incredible. He adds that even though he didn't fully understand what was happening, it was clear that Mo Bayek completely outclassed Guang. Byung also observes that Mo Bayek's movements were exceptionally smooth and precise. Despite using only basic techniques without any internal energy, Mo Bayek was able to defeat the head instructor effortlessly. Mo Bayek continues speaking to his trainees, emphasizing that training in external martial arts alone can achieve the kind of speed he demonstrated, even without internal energy. He reminds them of the importance of never neglecting their external training, no matter the circumstances. At that moment, Guang's frustration reaches its peak. He feels utterly humiliated and realizes that if the fight ends this way, he will never be able to face anyone again. Fueled by desperation, he charges toward Mo Bayek with lightning speed, determined to reclaim his honor at any cost. He channels all his remaining energy into his fist and launches a devastating attack at Mo Bayek. Mo Bayek sighs and tells Guang that he should have stayed down and withdrawn from the fight. With effortless grace, Mo Bayek dodges the counterattack and begins delivering precise counterstrikes, aimed at Guang's vital points, temporarily disrupting his energy flow. This time, Mo Bayek doesn't just evade but channels his own strength into his fist, delivering a powerful punch to Guang's jaw, effectively halting his attack and knocking him down instantly. Instructor Guang attempts a counterattack but finds himself unable to move due to his injuries. The sound of his heavy fall reverberates across the training grounds, marking his decisive defeat in front of all the gathered trainees. Seizing the moment, Mo Bayek explains to his trainees that when an opponent loses the ability to use their internal energy, they can be defeated easily by focusing attacks on their weaknesses. He elaborates that it's possible to break an opponent's bones or even incapacitate them entirely without using internal energy, as long as vital points are targeted precisely. The trainees respond in unison, affirming their understanding, their faces glowing with pride in their instructor. In stark contrast, the rest of the trainees and onlookers are filled with astonishment, unable to believe that the head instructor lost so easily. Even the other instructors present are shocked by what they have witnessed. Everyone had assumed Mo Bayek was just a mediocre instructor in the Great Dragon unit, especially given his previous lack of interest in teaching his trainees and leaving them to self-train. However, his defeat of the head instructor, who is close to being ranked first among martial artists, is nothing short of astounding, especially since he achieved this without using internal energy, relying solely on the 3-talent fist technique. The audience is now convinced that Mo Bayek is no ordinary instructor, and that he carries a story much deeper than anyone had realized. At that moment, Instructor Jigyal arrives at the training grounds, surprised to see the trainees gathered there. He shouts at them, asking why they are not back in their classes. But his attention is quickly drawn to Mo Bayek, and he immediately suspects that something unusual has occurred. Approaching Mo Bayek, Jigyal is greeted with a smile. However, Jigyal's gaze shifts to the unconscious body of Instructor Guang lying on the ground. He asks what happened, and Mo Bayek casually replies that the situation had become troublesome again, forcing him to intervene. Later that evening, Master Doyle meets with Chief Mo Young in the main wing. Master Doyle starts the conversation, saying he heard about the events of the day, noting that he had always known Sado Guang to be ambitious and harboring a strong dislike for the Great Dragon Unit. Unfortunately for Guang, he made the mistake of challenging Hamo Bayek. Chief Mo Young responds, remarking that Guang chose to walk into the lion's den himself. He then asks what the next step should be, especially considering that an ordinary instructor from the Great Dragon Unit defeated the head instructor of Jam Ryung, who is responsible for training the 1st Division. If the leader of Jam Ryung objects to this, it could cause significant problems. Master Doyle tries to reassure him, pointing out that there were numerous witnesses to the event, making it difficult for the leader of Jam Ryung to object without facing scrutiny. Still, Chief Mo Young expresses his concern, admitting that he isn't sure how to handle the situation, particularly with Hamo Bayek involved. Master Doyle responds that there is little they can do at this point, as the matter has already unfolded, and Hamo Bayek is now officially part of the unit. In the office of the Deputy Director, Leadership Wing Director Nam Jung-hwa questions Deputy Director Juk Mo Young about the truth of the rumors he has heard. Juk Mo Young confirms that the news was equally shocking to him. After a moment of silence, Director Nam asks if the individual responsible for the event is indeed Hamo Bayek. Juk Mo Young confirms without hesitation that it was Mo Bayek who caused the commotion. Director Nam Jung-hwa becomes agitated and demands that Juk Mo conduct a thorough investigation into Mo Bayek, down to the smallest details, even the color of his clothing. Juk Mo responds promptly, assuring Nam that he will handle it immediately, and rushes off to gather information about Mo Bayek, who has become the talk of Ju Ryong-guan. Meanwhile, Director Nam remains anxious, reflecting on how the Great Dragon Unit has been a constant source of trouble for him. Now, they have a hidden master among them, complicating matters further. Adding to the problem is Sa Do Guang, the fool who consistently tries to curry favor with the 5 noble families. Despite Nam's generosity in granting him a prominent position, Guang managed to disgrace himself in such a humiliating manner. Nam recalls a conversation with instructor Ji Gyal when he had suggested that Ji Gyal could retain his position in the council wing. He acknowledged Ji Gyal's immense talent, recognized even by the Ji Gyal clan, and remarked that if Ji Gyal had stayed in the Chonmak wing, he could have easily risen to the rank of department head or higher. Nam noted that exceptional talents like Ji Gyal rarely ended up in a place like this. He offered Ji Gyal the opportunity to bide his time and become one of Nam's allies to achieve greater ambitions. However, Ji Gyal declined politely, stating that he preferred to remain with the students who needed his support and guidance, especially the first-year trainees in the Jam Ryung unit, adding that this role was deeply meaningful to him at the moment. Nam found Ji Gyal's response surprising, pointing out that someone with his unique skills and extraordinary talents deserved a far higher status than what he currently held. Ji Gyal, sensing Nam's true intentions, asked if Nam was referring to his nephew, currently in the Jam Ryung wing. Nam admitted as much, assuring Ji Gyal not to misunderstand his motives. He explained that he had no idea why the boy had ended up in the Jam Ryung unit in the first place, but suggested that if the child proved to have genuine talent, it could benefit both of them, potentially leading to promotions. Ji Gyal left the meeting, reaffirming his commitment to his current role as an instructor, and rejecting the temptations Nam had offered. Reflecting on the memory, Nam felt irritated with Ji Gyal, deeming him foolish and difficult to manipulate. Nevertheless, he acknowledged his need for Ji Gyal's skills to ensure the success of his plans. He recalled how he had attempted to appease Ji Gyal by appointing him as the head instructor, only to see him return severely defeated by a mere instructor from the Great Dragon unit. Angrily, Nam declared that he would no longer tolerate this situation and would ensure that the one responsible for this humiliation pays dearly. The next day, Mo Bayek is back in the training grounds with his 7th squad trainees, teaching them as usual the techniques of breathing and mental development. He notices a change in his students. They are now more serious and enthusiastic about learning. Mo Bayek guesses that this shift is due to their witnessing the battle yesterday, where the head instructor was soundly defeated by him. By midday, Mo Bayek realizes it is time for lunch. He debates whether to leave his trainees to go on their own or accompany them for a group meal. Observing their hesitation about returning to the Tam Ryung East Wing dining hall after their previous bad experience, he decides to take them to the Tam Ryung South Wing this time. In the Tam Ryung South Wing, the trainees ask why this location was chosen for their meal. Mo Bayek explains that this wing is closer to their quarters in the Great Dragon unit, allowing them to return to their rooms immediately after eating. The trainees agree, with Jin-san commenting that the Eastern dining hall wasn't very welcoming, whereas here, they don't feel the same disdainful stares they experienced before. Mo Bayek notices that the South Wing appears more crowded, with workers dressed in tattered clothing, in stark contrast to the East Wing. Upon reaching the dining hall, he observes that the menu is old and torn, completely unlike the pristine menu in the East Wing. He tells his trainees that they should give it a try since they've already come this far, and the food might still be good despite appearances. However, upon entering, they are shocked by the disgusting sight of the food served, with its foul odor making it nearly unbearable. Additionally, the portions are meager, prompting Mo Bayek to confront the cooks. He complains about the small servings, pointing out that the East Wing allows diners to take as much food as they want. One of the cooks rudely retorts that if Mo Bayek isn't satisfied, he can return to the East Wing. Mo Bayek controls his anger, refraining from any aggressive reaction, while Dan comments that he cannot bring himself to eat because of the food's terrible smell and appearance. Sitting with his trainees at a table, Mo Bayek remarks on the stark difference in the quality of food and service between the South and East Wings. Dan adds that the food here is terrible by every standard, while Jin-san notes that the portions are smaller, there's no variety, and even the presentation is unappetizing. Mobaek agrees, saying the food here resembles dog food served to humans. He recalls the conversations he had with Masters Doyle and Mo-young about the importance of taking care of trainees, and the lectures they frequently gave him. The stark contrast between their words and the actual food provided to the trainees fuels Mobaek's indignation. He rises abruptly, slamming the table, and orders his trainees not to take a single bite of this food. He storms out of the dining hall, leaving his trainees stunned and questioning where he is going and what he plans to do. Overwhelmed with anger, he ignores their inquiries and heads straight to the office of Wing Director Doyle. Upon arrival, Mobaek slams a stack of papers onto Doyle's desk, demanding that he examine them. Doyle, surprised, asks what these papers are. Mobaek responds heatedly, saying they are the food menus for the 4 Tam Ryung wings. Doyle asks why Mobaek brought these menus now. Mobaek, still angry, tells him he will understand everything once he reads them. As Doyle begins reading the menus, he notices Mobaek's tension and anger. He rereads the menus several times to confirm what he is seeing, and notices something peculiar about one of them. He points out that one menu is significantly different from the others. Mobaek explains that the odd menu belongs to the South Wing, and is heavily altered compared to reality. Shocked, Doyle says he can't believe this is true. Mobaek skeptically asks if Doyle has ever visited the South Wing before. Doyle admits that he hasn't, explaining that he usually eats in the North Wing due to its proximity to his office. Mobaek questioned Doyle, asking if he was familiar with the taste and appearance of the food in the North Wing. When Doyle confirmed, Mobaek insisted he accompany him to the South Wing, explaining that seeing the situation firsthand would clarify the issue more effectively than words. Doyle hesitated, suggesting he might visit later, but Mobaek's frustration grew. He pointedly asked if Doyle understood the gravity of the situation. With rising anger, he continued, saying that what was happening was unacceptable, emphasizing that people need food to survive. He expressed outrage that the trainees in the Great Dragon Unit, destined to become cannon fodder within 2 years, were being subjected to such indignities, making their already grim lives even more unbearable. He remarked that even animals would be treated better. Doyle, struck by the intensity and truth of Mobaek's words, felt a pang of guilt and agreed to accompany him immediately. Shortly after, the two arrived at the South Wing dining hall. However, the kitchen staff barred their entry without explanation. Head chef Hong O-chul soon appeared, hurrying to greet Doyle warmly and inquiring about the unexpected visit. Doyle responded calmly, explaining that he happened to be passing by and decided to eat at the South Wing. He then questioned why the staff had stopped him from entering. Hong, clearly flustered, stammered an excuse, saying the hall was not properly cleaned and therefore unsuitable for someone of Doyle's status. He offered to prepare a more appropriate space if given a few minutes. Mobaek, unimpressed by the explanation, asked Hong about the people already eating in the supposedly unclean dining hall. Doyle supported Mobaek, pointing out that he had always entered the North Wing freely, and questioning why the South Wing was any different. He demanded that they be allowed to enter without further delay. Hong, visibly uneasy, tried to explain that conditions in the South Wing differed from those in the North. He also implied that Mobaek, being unfamiliar with the area, was causing unnecessary trouble. Mobaek countered by reminding Hong that the wing director had assured him that all 4 Tam Ryung wings followed the same rules and procedures. He questioned the discrepancy between that assurance and Hong's current claims. He added that the official regulations explicitly supported equality among the wings, further placing Hong in an awkward position. Doyle noted Mobaek's sudden emphasis on rules, finding it a positive development, and remarked that treating the South Wing as an exception was unacceptable. Hong reluctantly admitted awareness of the rules but attempted to downplay the issue, citing practical considerations specific to the location. As the delays continued, Mobaek's patience ran out. Releasing a surge of his internal energy, he created a powerful and intimidating aura that left everyone present visibly shaken. With a calm but firm tone, he informed Hong that the path must be opened immediately, warning that failure to comply could result in severe consequences. Terrified by Mobaek's overwhelming energy, Hong quickly stepped aside, clearing the way without further argument. Mobaek turned to Doyle, stating that it was time to go inside. As Hong watched them enter, a deep sense of dread overcame him, as if he knew something terrible was about to happen. Upon entering, Mobaek and Doyle were confronted with the appalling sight of the meals being served. Doyle was horrified by the food's disgusting appearance, unable to fathom how the trainees had been forced to consume such meals for so long. Director Doyle struggled to fathom how the food he was seeing could be deemed suitable for human consumption, leaving him overwhelmed with shame and embarrassment. He realized that Mobaek, who had only been at the facility for a few days, had quickly uncovered the situation, whereas Doyle himself, as the wing's director, had failed to notice it throughout his tenure. Doyle requested to inspect the kitchen, and upon entering, both he and Mobaek were struck by an even greater sense of shock. Vegetables were scattered haphazardly across the floor, animals roamed freely, eating from the food supplies, and the general state of cleanliness was appalling. The cooking utensils appeared contaminated, and some of the food showed clear signs of spoilage, rendering it entirely unfit for consumption. Mobaek commented on the stark contrast between the claims that all 4 Tam Ryung wings were equal and the grim reality he was witnessing. He pointed out that such substandard food was being served exclusively to trainees and workers in the South Wing, sarcastically remarking that Ju Ryongguan's reputation as a great institution was truly deserved. Doyle, deeply embarrassed, apologized to Mobaek, admitting that no words could adequately justify the situation. He promised to take immediate action, assuring Mobaek that head chef Hong would be detained and a full investigation launched. Mobayak agreed, but cautioned Doyle against neglecting food-related issues again. He emphasized that people fight daily for survival and do not deserve such treatment. Without adding another word, Mobayak left, leaving Doyle standing in silence, burdened by the weight of responsibility. Moments later, head chef Hong rushed over, begging for a chance to explain himself. However, Doyle, now seething with anger, refused to hear any excuses. He lashed out at Hong with harsh words about his mismanagement and the neglect that allowed such conditions to persist. Shortly afterward, the entire kitchen staff was replaced, and a new menu was implemented. Everyone noticed a significant improvement in the food's quality, both in taste and quantity, though the reasons behind the sudden change remained unclear. Doyle and Mobayak visited the dining hall to ensure that the changes were being maintained. Mobayak remarked on how quickly the situation had improved, prompting Doyle to reply that some issues simply cannot be delayed. Mobayak added that allowing such a situation to persist for years when a single individual could have resolved it was entirely unacceptable. Doyle found himself unable to refute the point, acknowledging the truth of Mobayak's words. Mobayak then explained to Doyle that the root of the problem lay in how members of each group had been divided among the Tam Ryung wings based on their social status. Over time, informal practices had emerged, creating a hierarchy in which members of different tiers were treated unequally. Doyle responded, noting that after the members of the Great Dragon Unit were split into the Jam Ryung and R Ryung units and stationed in the South Wing, certain unscrupulous individuals had taken advantage of the situation. These individuals assumed that reducing the quality of food for workers and the Great Dragon Unit trainees would go unnoticed, and with no complaints being made, they grew bolder. He added that the core issue was the collusion among the directors of the four wings, who had been operating dishonestly. Mobayak expressed his anger, describing these individuals as acting like a gang. Doyle, with newfound determination, declared that from now on, he would take all his meals in different Tam Ryung wings to monitor the situation personally, regardless of any challenges. Mobayak smirked and remarked, "Let's see how they behave when they're under constant scrutiny." Director Doyle found himself unable to respond to Mobayak's remark, silently questioning why Mobayak, specifically, had been the one to notice this issue when no one else had before. As Mobayak left the dining hall, he encountered instructor Jigal, who asked why he was there. Jigal surprised Mobayak by expressing his gratitude. Mobayak, puzzled, asked what prompted this sentiment. Jigal explained that Mobayak had been right all along. He had never imagined that corruption could run so deep in the Tam Ryung wings, where unwritten customs were used as an excuse to degrade the quality of food for warriors and workers. Mobayak was taken aback by Jigal's admission, aware that members of the five great clans rarely acknowledged their mistakes. Jigal confessed that he had focused solely on the Tam Ryung East Wing, where the Jam Ryung unit was stationed, assuming the other wings operated at the same standards as the North and East. Mobayak commented that Jigal's misunderstanding was understandable if he hadn't been aware of the situation. He informed Jigal that Director Doyle had promised to prevent such incidents in the future and assured him that the fault wasn't his, encouraging him not to dwell on the matter. Before Mobayak could leave, Jigal invited him to attend the Great Dragon Unit's group training session. He explained that these sessions were held on the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th of every month, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., in the main training ground at the command wing. Dan was visibly excited, anticipating that instructor Jigal, known for his expertise in the Jam Ryung unit, would teach them an exceptional combat technique. Once the trainees gathered, Jigal began the session promptly, while Mobayak observed from a distance, admitting that this type of structured group training suited Jigal's style. At that moment, Director Doyle arrived unexpectedly and remarked on Mobayak's apparent interest in such activities. Mobayak asked why Doyle was there and whether he was following him. Doyle replied that his presence was merely coincidental, as he had come to monitor the first group training session for the Great Dragon Unit and decided to greet Mobayak when he spotted him. Mobayak coldly requested that Doyle ignore him in the future, slightly irritating Doyle, though he was beginning to grow accustomed to Mobayak's sharp demeanor. Doyle continued, noting the significance of these sessions. He explained that they had enabled the Great Dragon Unit to achieve a survival rate of at least 5%. Without Jigal's efforts, that rate might have barely reached 1%, especially since the Great Dragon Unit was composed of ordinary individuals who often lacked internal energy or combat skills. The fact that 5% of them survived the Cursed Lands was nothing short of a miracle. Jigal was a source of great pride for the Jigal clan, and with that pride came a profound sense of responsibility and duty as a member of the 5 great clans. This group training session stemmed from his commitment to the trainees' well-being. Mobayak understood this sentiment, having already noticed Jigal's distinctiveness compared to other nobles from the great clans. However, as Mobayak and Doyle conversed, they observed something unusual in Jigal's actions. Jigal had brought out a wooden shield, planted it firmly into the ground, and displayed it to the trainees. He then announced that he would teach them shield techniques instead of conventional martial arts. The trainees were stunned by this revelation, having expected to learn basic skills like swordsmanship and combat techniques. Jigal explained that while some might underestimate shields, they were exceptional tools that had saved his life countless times. He emphasized that for those venturing into Sonoma Forest, shields would be an essential weapon and a lifeline. He urged the trainees to prepare themselves as they would begin training with shields immediately. The trainees approached the shields, each selecting one before returning to their positions and lining up as instructed. Instructor Jigal asked them to closely observe the movements he was about to demonstrate and then practice them on their own. He emphasized that these skills would be their lifeline in the forest. Mobayak watched with growing admiration and anticipation, eager to see what Jigal would teach them. Without delay, Jigal began demonstrating his techniques with precision and seriousness. He assumed a proper stance and showcased the movements in front of the trainees. His actions were fluid and light, yet impressively fast, sharp, powerful, and meticulously calculated. The trainees were captivated by his performance, amazed at what they saw. Jiggle asked if they had observed his demonstration and assured them he would break it down step by step, instructing them to follow him carefully. The training session continued for some time, with Jiggle teaching sincerely and wholeheartedly. After the session concluded, Mobayek stepped outside with Doyle, who asked for his opinion. Mobek responded that the techniques were not bad, describing them as simple, yet highly effective. Doyle agreed, explaining that shield techniques were among the rarest forms of protection in the martial world. Morim. He elaborated that Jiggle had developed the shield technique himself through trial and error, drawing inspiration from military weaponry and the 18 arms of Wushu. Impressed, Mobayek acknowledged the effort behind such innovation. Doyle further explained that Jiggle's title of genius was well-deserved. He mentioned that the group training sessions for the Great Dragon Unit, initiated by Jiggle, were entirely unique, despite there being no obligation for a Jamryung unit instructor to conduct them. Because of this, the 9 major sects and 5 great families had expressed their dissatisfaction with the initiative. However, Jiggle's determination ensured that these group training sessions were held 4 times a month. Mobek concluded by noting that Jiggle was far from naive. He excused himself, intending to get a meal, but Doyle urged him to stay and observe further. Reflecting on Jiggle's words about never abandoning the trainees regardless of their slim chances of success, Mobek decided to take on this challenge alongside instructor Jiggle Myung. After a long and exhausting day, Mobek returns to his residence. However, he does not rest. Instead, he heads to his study, reflecting on his students' behavior during training. It was evident that their attitude had become strangely more serious during the sessions. He recalled how, in the beginning, he saw them merely as a group of mischievous or spoiled children. He then began contemplating why Mr. Doyle, the wing manager, and Mo Young, the training hall leader, chose to gather these specific children. He was certain each of them possessed extraordinary talent. This became particularly evident when Mobayek successfully synchronized their breathing, revealing they were far from ordinary. Even the troublemakers, Nak and Wu Jin, showed exceptional potential. Mobek continued pondering the reasons behind Mr. Doyle assigning him to train this unique group of students, wondering if this group was the result of coincidence or a well-thought-out plan. Yet, he was also convinced that one among the 5 was entirely different from the others, Dan, who appeared to be an ordinary boy with a blocked energy flow and no prior experience in martial arts training. Mobayek wondered what he should do with this boy, who was striving to gain strength for the sake of his family, and how seriously he should approach him. Elsewhere, specifically in the dormitory of Tam Ryong Wing for the Great Dragon Unit trainees, Dan asked his roommate Sun Jin if it was true that instructor Mobayek had not used any internal energy when facing the head trainer, as claimed. Sun Jin, annoyed, replied that it was indeed true, and that Mobayek had managed to defeat a high-ranking fighter without using any internal energy. Dan then wondered about the source of Mobayek's strength. Sun Jin, irritated, asked why he was curious, and Dan replied that he felt he was learning from a great individual and, with more effort, could become stronger. However, Sun Jin was visibly annoyed with Dan because of his unpleasant smell. He told him that he had tried hard to ignore it but could no longer endure it. Sun Jin asked Dan why he had not bathed before coming to bed in their shared room, pointing out that the smell was so bad it distracted him and made it difficult to do anything. Dan responded that he had indeed washed his hands, feet, and face. Sun Jin did not believe him, and seriously asked if Dan had taken a bath since joining the Great Dragon Unit. Dan innocently replied that he had never taken a bath, explaining that bathing was reserved for special occasions or warm weather. Sun Jin was utterly shocked by this revelation, unable to comprehend Dan's logic. Dan laughed and explained that the weather was far too cold, and the water in the public bath was cold as well. He added that bathing was not something one did regularly. This explanation provoked Sun Jin, who could no longer control his frustration. He shouted at Dan, chastising him for being content with merely washing his hands and feet after rigorous training sessions, explaining that this only made his odor worse over time. Sun Jin added that such behavior was harmful to his health and insisted that Dan go bathe immediately and wash his entire body. Dan was surprised by Sun Jin's insistence and asked how he could possibly bathe at such a late hour in such cold weather, suggesting that it could wait until the next day. However, Sun Jin did not give him the chance to escape. He grabbed Dan's hand and used his internal energy to warm his body slightly. Dan was taken aback by what was happening and felt his body become warmer. Sun Jin explained that he had used his internal energy to warm him and that it was the best he could do at his current level, clarifying that the warmth would last for only half an hour, and Dan needed to make the most of that time to bathe. Still amazed by the power of internal energy, Dan immediately went to bathe. Sun Jin sighs and says to himself that he can finally breathe freely now. Yet he finds himself wondering why he even cared about such matters, and how he ended up using his internal energy to help someone else, something completely uncharacteristic for him. He recalls his days back home in Chengdu, where he never acted this way with anyone. Instead, he would always create chaos and problems for everyone, causing constant annoyance to his family. Now, however, he feels he is beginning to care about others to some extent, even though he was exceptionally kind as a child. As one of the direct descendants of the Tang family, this name carried a significant weight and even greater responsibilities, which placed immense pressure on him. His limited talent made him endure the sharp, judgmental gazes of everyone around him. This ultimately led him to behave rudely and obnoxiously, but he now suspects that this may not have reflected his true self. After some time, Dan returns and eagerly asks Sun Jin for his opinion on his scent now. Sun Jin responds that while it is better, he could have bathed more thoroughly, especially since he returned earlier than expected. Sun Jin explains to him that cleanliness is crucial for martial artists who sweat profusely during training, emphasizing that maintaining a clean and healthy body is not optional, but a necessity. Dan apologizes, admitting that he was unaware of this before. Sun Jin reassures him that it is not an issue now since no health problems have arisen yet, but he warns him about the importance of maintaining cleanliness moving forward. He then requests that Dan address him simply as Sun Jin, without the Tang title. Sun Jin explains that if they were in Chengdu, it would have been acceptable for Dan to use Tang since he is 4 years older, but here, as peers, they can simply use their names. He also apologizes for using his internal energy to manipulate Dan's pulse points without permission, acknowledging that such an act is considered taboo. Dan responds that there is no need to apologize, as it helped him immensely. However, Sun Jin warns him never to allow anyone else to do the same in the future, as a precaution for his own safety. The night passes quietly, and everyone sleeps peacefully. The next morning, all the students gather in the training yard. Mo Baek announces that since everyone is present, they will continue practicing the breathing technique during the morning session. Mo Baek begins observing his students as they perform the technique, offering precise corrections and instructions. At the same time, he thinks to himself that he cannot teach them the lost incantations of the 3 talents technique, which represent the core martial secret of his sect, even though he knows it wouldn't be difficult for them to learn. He continues giving instructions, asking them to remain in place and focus deeply on their breathing process. He emphasizes the importance of synchronizing their inhalations and exhalations to concentrate their internal energies effectively. During the training, Mo Baek gathers and intensifies his own internal energy. He then announces that they are about to begin the real training now. He approaches each student and channels a portion of his internal energy into their bodies. At first, they feel something unusual, but they quickly realize it is their instructor's internal energy. Dan is the most astonished, as it is his first time experiencing the flow of internal energy in his body. Mo Baek instructs them to continue breathing calmly, focusing, and avoiding distractions. He notices that Dan is handling the internal energy with remarkable ease, which is unexpected given that it is his first experience. After some time, Sun Jin feels that the internal energy moving within him has now stabilized, surprising him with how its flow has become more organized, and its purity increased. Byung also observes that everyone's breathing rhythm has become more steady and fluid, confirming to him that Mo Baek must have done something different with them. However, he wonders why he alone was excluded from this process. His thoughts are interrupted when Mo Baek calls out to him, instructing him to focus on his breathing technique and warning him that he will not be able to gather any internal energy unless he does so. Mo Baek senses what is on Byung's mind at that moment and communicates with him telepathically, explaining that as a disciple of the Chunggang sect, he should not recklessly learn martial arts techniques belonging to another sect. He advises Byung to focus on breathing and learning in his own way. Byung is initially surprised by Mo Baek's ability to communicate in such a manner, but ultimately acknowledges the wisdom of his instructor's reasoning. After the training session concludes, the trainees are astonished to find their internal energy stabilized within their cores. Sun Jin remarks that this sensation is not something beginners can easily perceive or achieve, noting that even if the energy is as small as a grain of rice or less, it is still tangible and remarkable. Byung agrees, admitting that he exerted great effort to produce a very small amount of internal energy, and he wonders how the others managed to progress so quickly in the exercise. Sun Jin continues the conversation by asking Mo Baek if he is certain he hasn't used any dark martial arts. Everyone is surprised at the mention of dark martial arts and awaits Mo Baek's response. To their amazement, he bursts into laughter, assuring them that this wing is part of the Zhongchon alliance, making it impossible for him to use dark martial arts. Sun Jin replies that it is hard to believe what has been achieved without such techniques. Mo Baek responds that he simply practiced the technique himself. Sun Jin retorts that this is precisely why it seems illogical. Ha Yun joins the discussion, supporting Sun Jin's opinion by pointing out that planting internal energy within the cores of 4 individuals in such a short time is an achievement unheard of even among the most renowned clans. Everyone falls silent, displaying signs of amazement. Mo Baek confidently replies that the only person capable of accomplishing something like this is his own instructor. The trainees are surprised by this statement but cannot deny Mo Baek's exceptional skill. He advises them to focus on their training instead of being distracted by other matters. He then informs them that they can go have lunch and continue self-training afterward. When they ask about his destination, he does not answer. The place he heads to is the Northern Tam Ryong Wing, where he meets instructor Jaegal. Jaegal asks him why he has come to the Northern Wing, particularly since he usually has meals with his students. Mo Baek responds that he heard today's menu was special and wanted to try it. Jaegal asks him why he himself is present, to which he replies that ever since the recent incident, he has been moving between wings for meals as a precautionary measure. Jaegal adds that he does this as a preventive measure in case any problems arise again, and his presence in this wing today was purely coincidental. Mo Baek replies with a smile, saying it is a fortunate coincidence and that he came today to try the crispy fried beef strips. Jaegal, smiling, remarks that the mention of this dish reminds him of the Qingming festival, and he decides to try it himself, based on Mo Baek's recommendation. Mo Baek and Jaegal stand in the food queue, and finally, their turn arrives. Mo Baek feels delighted at the prospect of enjoying a good meal. In the dining hall, people recognize Mo Baek and talk about how the wing leaders leave the 7th Squad of the Great Dragon Unit entirely to itself. They comment that this is because their instructor won a formal fight with complete fairness, tarnishing Sado Guang's reputation entirely. They discuss how Sado Guang, who was just a petty instructor for first-year students, suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of an ordinary instructor from the Great Dragon Unit. Jaegal chuckles awkwardly and tells Mo Baek not to be bothered by their silly chatter. Mo Baek, however, is not paying attention to anything happening around him in the dining hall, completely absorbed in eating his meal, He comments to himself that the taste of this food is exactly like what he had when he defeated the leader of a dark sect, after which the villagers of Bayek Juk invited him to the same meal. Jagal realizes that his concerns were unfounded, as Mo Bayek is so engrossed in his meal that he does not hear a single word of what is being said around him. Jagal remarks that it is his first time tasting this dish, but admits that it is exceptionally delicious. Mo Bayek enthusiastically agrees, saying that the dish is fantastic and that he will go for another serving. While walking through the restaurant corridor, Mo Bayek overhears people discussing a beautiful girl who recently joined the Great Dragon Unit. They mention her name, Yoon Ha Min, which resembles that of the daughter of the renowned Yoon clan, speculating that she might be the Ice Lotus Flower, one of the 5 beauties of Murim. Some argue that the Yoon clan leader would never send the Ice Lotus Flower alone to the Great Dragon Unit, suggesting it's merely a coincidence of names. However, they conclude that her beauty makes it irrelevant whether she is the Ice Lotus Flower or just an ordinary girl. Mo Bayek becomes enraged upon hearing such disgraceful remarks from some instructors of the Gam Ryong Wing. He considers this a sign of the leadership wing's moral decline and resolves not to let this slide. At that moment, Yoon Ha enters the restaurant, calling out to instructor Mo Bayek, drawing attention with her extraordinary beauty, causing everyone to turn and look at her. Mo Bayek looks at her with surprise and asks why she is in this place. Yoon Ha, looking delighted, says she has finally found him, as she wishes to ask about the internal energy seed he planted within her. Before she can reach him, however, a man blocks her path. He tells her that this area is off limits to students, and adds that the Great Dragon Unit should have taught her this. Yoon Ha responds that she only wanted to ask her instructor something and questions who he is and why he is treating her this way. The man replies that she can ask her question and he will answer it himself, then offers her a spot in the Soaring Dragon Unit, stating that if she accepts his offer, he will overlook her transgression today. Meanwhile, Mo Bayek watches the scene from a distance, growing furious at the man's rudeness and wondering about his identity and audacity. Instructor Jagal, who notices the situation, quickly rises from his seat, realizing that Mo Bayek will not let this incident go easily, certain that the matter will escalate quickly, especially as the man continues to harass Yoon Ha, exploiting her status as a defenseless student. The man's behavior becomes bolder, and he starts openly bothering Yoon Ha, prompting her to insult him and demand that he leave her alone. The man, offended, retorts that a pest from the Great Dragon Unit dares to speak to him this way, adding that she should feel honored he is even addressing her and offering her such an opportunity. At that moment, Yoon Ha notices instructor Mo Bayek standing directly behind the man. In one swift motion, Mo Bayek delivers a powerful punch to the man, who is unable to dodge it. The punch is so forceful that it literally knocks the man off his feet, sending him crashing into tables and chairs behind him. Yoon Ha approaches instructor Mo Bayek, whose expression is rigid and furious. The restaurant patrons are startled by the commotion and begin to gather around, drawn by the noise. The man rises angrily and demands to know who Mo Bayek is and how he dares to lay a hand on him. Mo Bayek responds sarcastically, saying that having a tongue does not mean one should speak inappropriately. He adds sharply that he will not allow anyone to harass his student. The man becomes even angrier and mockingly asks if Mo Bayek is the instructor Yoon Ha was referring to. Mo Bayek, with a calm yet provoking demeanor, replies that if the northern Tam Ryong Wing has sunk to such a low level, where one cannot even enjoy a meal in peace, then the situation has become intolerable. Mo Bayek then turns to Yoon Ha and sternly asks why she is here and how she caused such a scene. He instructs her to stand behind him so he can handle the situation. The onlookers begin to laugh and eagerly anticipate the unfolding confrontation. The man, revealed to be instructor Han Byung, shouts at Mo Bayek, outraged that a novice instructor from the Great Dragon Unit dares to stand against him. He demands to know if Mo Bayek even knows who he is. Mo Bayek calmly replies that he has no interest in knowing, adding that his actions reflect his despicable character and that someone like him should learn to control his words. Instructor Han's anger intensifies as he warns Mo Bayek not to celebrate just because he managed a single surprise attack, hinting that he will teach him a lesson. Mo Bayek contemplates that the matter could have ended entirely had he used his internal energy, but he finds it hard to suppress his fury in front of such a large audience. The onlookers whisper among themselves, amazed at how an ordinary instructor from the Great Dragon Unit dares to speak so boldly to a prominent trainer. Instructor Jagal feels uneasy, unsure if he should intervene, especially since Instructor Han appears far stronger than Sa Do Guang. Han begins channeling his internal energy and declares his identity as an instructor of the Soaring Dragon Unit, sent from the Forest of Blades to oversee fourth-year students. He threatens Mo Bayek, stating that he will not leave this place unharmed without paying for what he has done. Mo Bayek notes that Han's strength far surpasses that of Sa Do Guang and recognizes that he has reached a true professional level. With a sarcastic tone, Mo Bayek asks if the leader of the alliance is aware that one of his instructors spends his time harassing female students. Han becomes even more enraged, vowing to tear Mo Bayek's tongue out and punish him, before launching a ferocious attack. However, Mo Bayek effortlessly evades the strike, commenting that Sa Do Guang used to talk the same way. This further provokes Han, who demands to know if Mo Bayek is the one who defeated Sa Do Guang. Mo Bayek calmly and sarcastically replies, pointing out that Han's manner of speech shows he is not much different from Sa Do Guang. Losing all composure, Han declares that Mo Bayek is digging his own grave. He attacks violently, but Mo Bayek skillfully dodges each move and counters with a direct strike. The blow lands hard, causing Han to fall to the ground in pain. Before Han can regain his balance, Mo Bayek delivers a powerful kick, sending Han flying across the room and crashing into the restaurant wall, breaking it and landing outside in the training yard. Mo Bayek stands tall and composed, while everyone around watches in stunned silence and disbelief. Even Yoon Ha cannot believe her instructor's unnatural strength, and Instructor Jagal appears equally astonished. Finally, Mobayek speaks in a calm and innocent tone, remarking that he may have hit him a little harder than intended. The crowd slowly begins to murmur, expressing their disbelief at how easily Mobayek defeated Instructor Han. Han rises slowly, consumed by anger, and speaks in a menacing tone, stating that he cannot believe Mobayek forced him to unsheath his sword. He declares that Mobayek will not leave this arena in one piece. Han's immense energy creates chaos in the surroundings, leading people throughout Tamryong to suspect an enemy attack during their meals. When they turn to the source of the commotion, they find it coming from the northern wing of Tamryong. Unable to comprehend how such disorder could emerge from a place where instructors gather, even Mobayek's students grow curious about the incident, suspecting a clash between instructors. They feel anxious upon learning that Yun Ha mentioned meeting instructor Mobayek at the northern wing. Meanwhile, in the northern wing, Han reaches the peak of his fury. When Mobayek's students arrive at the training yard, they are shocked to see their instructor fighting Han barehanded. Han shouts angrily, demanding that Mobayek stop moving like a cowardly rat, to which Mobayek replies sarcastically that he may have overestimated Han. Judging by his swordsmanship, Mobayek deduces that Han hails from Dorim, but compares him to a string of pearls around a pig's neck. Han furiously retorts that Mobayek seems ready to meet his end prematurely, before sharpening his sword with internal energy, enhancing its power and sharpness. Han announces sinisterly that he will now reveal the ultimate technique of the Zhongchon Alliance leader, the sky-severing demon blade, Danshin Chama. A powerful glow emanates from Han's sword, its brilliance so intense that everyone takes notice. Han then charges at Mobayek with incredible speed, launching a ferocious and lethal attack. However, Mobayek remains stationary, exuding an aura of unshakable confidence. As the tension peaks, his eyes gleam with determination and resolve. Mobayek decides to approach the fight calmly. With a movement faster than sound, he dodges Instructor Han's rapid attacks, leaving Han stunned and unable to comprehend how Mobayek manages to evade his precise strikes. Han continues his assault in blind rage, recklessly disregarding the danger of his attacks. Meanwhile, Mobayek remains fully focused, his mind preoccupied with the intricacies of the sky-severing demon blade technique. He recalls having seen it countless times during the recent wars, especially during his support of the Alliance leader, where he observed the technique executed freely in joint attacks. These experiences gave him unparalleled insight into its evolution in the fiercest battles. After a series of violent attacks by Han, the latter feels victorious, convinced he has eliminated his opponent. However, his triumph is short-lived when Mobayek emerges confidently through the dust, revealing that his understanding and mastery of the Danshin Chama technique far surpass Han's. Mobayek swiftly counterattacks with blinding speed, disorienting Han, who is still in shock at his opponent's resilience. With a sharp tone, Mobayek remarks that Han's execution of the sky-severing demon blade is fundamentally flawed. He then delivers a direct and forceful strike to Han, inflicting severe internal injuries. Han collapses to the ground, unable to resist any further. The audience is left in awe of the outcome, witnessing how Mobayek remained unharmed despite Han's relentless attacks, while Han, one of Tamryong's elite fighters, lies defeated before them. Even Mobayek's students, despite being aware of his exceptional skill, stand in stunned silence at the result of the battle. Yun Ha is too shocked to speak, prompting Sun Jin to comment that he cannot believe their instructor defeated a first-class fighter using only the basics of the three arts fist technique. Mobayek then informs everyone that this time he utilized his internal energy, making him confident that Han will not recover easily. However, despite his exhaustion, Han begins coughing and forces himself to stand, determined to continue fighting. Though breathing heavily, he screams at Mobayek, declaring that he is willing to sacrifice his life if it means putting an end to an arrogant man like him. Mobayek responds with a sarcastic smile, commending Han's determination to rise again, though he notes to himself that Han's eyes betray a complete loss of sanity. Han begins channeling his internal energy once more to perform a dangerous technique known as Heaven-Collapsing Demon Annihilation. He charges at Mobayek with immense speed, his sword brimming with energy, driven by a murderous intent, fixated solely on eliminating Mobayek at any cost. Mobayek is momentarily surprised that someone like Han managed to master the ultimate form of this skill. He warns the spectators to retreat from the area due to its extreme danger. As rocks begin flying in all directions, everyone flees the vicinity, while Instructor Jagal shields Yun Ha, moving her to safety. Mobayek's students also scramble to escape the danger zone. Han, however, loses all control and continues his ferocious assault on Mobayek, showing no regard for the lives of those around him. Nevertheless, Mobayek continues to provoke him with sarcastic remarks about the weakness of his attacks, leaving Han incredulous at how Mobayek repeatedly evades blows that even the Alliance leader would struggle to avoid. Han is taken aback when Mobayek suddenly appears above him in the air, declaring that the sky-severing demon blade is not a shallow or weak martial art, and that he cannot bear to see it executed in such a disgraceful and appalling manner. Mobayek then unleashes a powerful attack using his internal energy, rendering Han incapable of dodging or escaping. Han screams in agony and collapses, definitively ending the fight with Mobayek's victory as expected. That evening, Mobayek is summoned to the office of Wing Manager Doyle, who remarks that today's events resemble the previous incident with instructor Sa Do-Guang. He points out that Mobayek has caused yet another commotion, despite only a short time passing since the last incident. Mobayek questions Doyle's assertion that he was responsible for the disturbance, arguing that those men were worthless and deserved worse than what they received. Doyle presses him to elaborate, prompting Mobayek to explain that one of those men instigated the fight and was exceptionally aggravating. He asks Doyle if he had not heard or known anything about this man beforehand. Doyle replies that he had heard much about Han Byung, but never expected him to be this disgraceful and reprehensible. Mobaek sighs without responding, considering this negligence in itself, and then remarks that perhaps Doyle should be grateful that he resolved the situation and stopped it at this point, adding that otherwise, he would have been obligated to report the incident to the Alliance authorities. This shocks Doyle, who quickly retorts that such an action would spark a major war between the Alliance and the Forest of Blades. Doyle also reflects internally, realizing that concealing Yunha's presence in the wing could create serious issues between the Alliance and the Forest of Blades. He then tells Mobaek that reporting the incident would not be in Yunha's best interest, as the Alliance would become a nightmare for her. Mobaek storms out of the office, telling Doyle sharply that he should exert better control over his instructors, emphasizing that being skilled and professional does not make them angels, and that people of such a vile level should not roam freely under any circumstances. He slams the door shut behind him, leaving Doyle deep in thought, feeling that Mobaek's presence has made his life far more complicated, and that his days in the wing are now more exhausting than all the past years combined. The next day, the Soaring Dragon Unit is abuzz with discussions about the fight that occurred the day before, while the Great Dragon Unit's 7th Squad continues to marvel at their instructor's immense strength and his exceptional ability to overcome skilled instructors thanks to his mastery of Alliance techniques. Sun Jin teases Yunha, saying she was lucky the instructor was there, and that his actions show he cares about her, which angers Yunha, who retorts that the same applies to him. Byung intervenes, trying to calm things down by telling Sun Jin to leave her alone, noting that she is likely still upset about what happened the previous day. This proves true, as Yunha feels deeply troubled by the humiliating situation she faced, and resolves to become stronger so that no one dares to treat her that way again. Yunha declares that she will use her free time for training, leaving the others to do as they wish. Sun Jin is surprised by her sudden seriousness, but Dan follows her and asks to train together on shield techniques. Yunha is taken aback by his request, but does not refuse. While the others split off, some training in swordsmanship and others in martial arts, Sun Jin suggests that everyone train in their preferred way, but is startled to find instructor Mobaek suddenly standing behind him. This surprises Yunha and Dan, who point out that it is their free time for self-training. Mobaek responds by ordering them all to gather in front of him, explaining that he had intended to leave them to train independently, but has decided to accelerate their training pace. Sun Jin asks about this sudden change of plan, and Mobaek replies that he feels frustrated seeing others look down on them with disdain. He admits he hadn't noticed this before, but became aware of it today. Sun Jin reminds him that the instructor himself had advised them to return home, claiming they would die within 2 years anyway. Mobaek affirms that he still holds this view, but adds that as long as he is with them, he will not tolerate seeing them disrespected. Sun Jin feels embarrassed by this response, as the other trainees glance at him with annoyance, prompting Mobaek to make an unexpected decision by appointing Sun Jin as the team leader. Sun Jin, shocked, questions the sudden decision, to which Mobaek sarcastically responds that his knack for arguing makes him suitable for the role. Sun Jin protests, pointing out that they aren't even a team yet, but Mobaek announces that the team is officially registered and names Sun Jin as its leader, noting that Dan has already agreed to the decision. Sun Jin turns to the others for their opinions, and Byung calmly remarks that Sun Jin's boisterous nature makes him a fitting leader, and the others agree. This further frustrates Sun Jin, who is on the verge of starting an argument, but Mobaek stops him and asserts that this is a direct order from his instructor. Unable to argue further, Sun Jin reluctantly accepts his new role as leader of the 7th Squad. Mobaek announces that the training will begin with teaching them combat movements, explaining that the foundation of the Samjae Gong combat style lies in mastering the triple combat technique. Dan becomes extremely excited upon learning that they will finally begin training in real techniques and martial arts. Trainee Byung raises his hand, informing Mobaek that he has prior knowledge of the principles of the triple technique. However, Mobaek responds that understanding the principles is not the most important aspect. Rather, what truly matters is training together and considering the possibility of losing their swords one day. This makes mastering these techniques essential. Yunha interrupts the discussion by raising her hand to ask a question. Mobaek permits her to speak, and she inquires about the internal energy she felt for the first time the previous day. Mobaek explains that this internal energy is merely a small seed, and it is currently impossible to move it at will at this stage. Yunha and Dan ask simultaneously when they will be able to control this energy, to which Mobaek replies that with consistent training, they might achieve this soon. He adds that the internal energy was cultivated using the Samjae Gong technique. Therefore, as they practice the foundational movements of this style, they will gradually feel the energy moving naturally, making it easier and more precise to control over time. Dan and Yunha's eyes light up with enthusiasm upon hearing this. Mobaek then turns to Yunha, asking if her visit to find him was purely out of curiosity, which ultimately led to her being harassed and humiliated. Yunha feels guilty and embarrassed, apologizing profusely to her instructor. Mobaek responds kindly, saying that she would have learned the answer in due time, advising her to be more cautious in the future. He then changes the subject, announcing the start of their training session. After a physically demanding day of intense exercises, night falls, and each trainee retires to their room to rest. In the Yun Ryong Siak wing, Yunha remains awake, lost in thought, suffering from insomnia. She believes her sleeplessness stems from the many recent events that have left her restless. She recalls the moment in the restaurant when her instructor appeared and defended her, marking the first time in her life that someone felt the need to protect her, even those closest to her. such as her younger uncle or brother, who supported her against the Yoon family's oppression, could not do so. She remembers how she fled the Yoon family's hell and sought refuge in Tam Ryong. Yet she finds it hard to believe that someone she met only a few days ago would intervene and protect her so decisively, especially considering that, at first, he was unwelcoming and unwilling to train them, insisting instead on sending them back home without any justifications. Still, she sees Mo Baek as a mysterious and extraordinary figure, particularly with his exceptional combat strength and how he allowed her to feel internal energy for the first time and displayed a desire to protect her. She concludes that many enigmatic things surround Mo Baek, but she realizes that coming here was not a bad choice. In fact, it might have been the best decision she ever made. She decides she would rather die on the battlefield than return home. Elsewhere that same night, in the forests of Gyo Ryongguan, Dan stays awake, training rigorously in shield techniques taught earlier by instructor Jagal. He trains with great determination despite his exhaustion and the sweat pouring down his face in the freezing night air. Meanwhile, Mo Baek senses an unusual presence and quietly sneaks through the trees to discover that it is Dan Mok-wan training. Mo Baek feels annoyed and frustrated with Dan's tendency to act on his own and innovate without adhering to the rules. However, he observes Dan for a moment, noting that the trainee is so immersed in training that he is unaware of Mo Baek's presence. Mo Baek approaches and asks Dan what he is doing so late at night and why he hasn't gone to bed yet. Startled, Dan turns to see Mo Baek and asks why his instructor is here at such an hour. Mo Baek reminds him that he asked first, questioning why Dan is staying out here when the moonlight barely illuminates the surroundings, making training nearly impossible. Dan explains that he was practicing shield techniques because he couldn't train properly in the morning and feels the urgent need to become stronger. Mo Baek responds by saying that it is still too early for Dan and there's no need to rush. He comments that from his current state, it seems the shield is carrying Dan rather than the other way around. Dan asks what he means by that, and Mo Baek explains that while his muscles have started to develop over the past weeks, they are still insufficient. He clarifies that external martial arts rely heavily on a well-balanced body and strong muscles as a foundation for any progress, and Dan has not yet reached the minimum required level. Dan, feeling frustrated, tells his instructor passionately that he will train harder and harder to reach the required level, but Mo Baek responds firmly that there's still a long road ahead, and that more serious training will come later. He emphasizes that the most important thing right now is for Dan to eat healthy meals and build his body properly. With his current thin frame, Mo Baek explains, Dan won't be able to endure external martial arts training, and if he keeps overexerting himself, his body will only weaken further. Dan tries to object, arguing that this will put them behind the others, who are far more advanced. Mo Baek sternly replies that this is an issue they can address later, and warns that continuing as he is now might permanently damage his body. He adds that learning the Samjae Gong technique might help Dan avoid complete physical collapse, but the imbalance between his internal and external energy remains a significant problem. Thus, he stresses that the priority is strengthening his body through proper nutrition, promising Dan that once he reaches the necessary physical level, he will begin advanced training. Dan attempts to respond, but Mo Baek reprimands him sharply, insisting that he should not question his instructor's words. He declares that the most important training for Dan right now is to sleep well and eat well, and orders him to go to bed immediately. The two stare at each other briefly, Mo Baek visibly irritated and Dan desperate, but Dan ultimately complies and asks for permission to leave. After Dan departs, Mo Baek sighs, muttering that ignorance is one of the hardest things to deal with, and that he never expected convincing a child to be this difficult. Suddenly, a new thought crosses his mind, and he turns toward the student quarters of Gyo Ryongguan, wondering if all his students are asleep in their rooms. As he suspected, he discovers that one of the trainees is outside their room, practicing external martial arts. The trainee is Yoon Ha, who has taken advantage of the empty training ground at this late hour to train freely. Her training is intense, with her movements appearing flexible, agile, and swift at the same time. She mutters to herself that she must become stronger as quickly as possible, and won't waste her precious sleep time as long as she can use it for training, vowing never to face humiliation again. Yoon Ha abruptly stops her training when she notices Mo Baek standing before her. He asks her why she is awake and training at such a late hour. Yoon Ha questions why her instructor is there, to which he replies that he was on his way to bed. He then asks her about the nature of her exercises, and why she is training at this hour. Yoon Ha explains that she couldn't sleep, and decided to use the time for some training before returning to her room. Mo Baek understands her reasoning, especially knowing the circumstances she endured before coming here. He decides to use his ultimate eye technique, discovering that her body is in excellent health compared to Dan, thanks to her focus on maintaining her health and eating nutritious meals. He also notes that her energy flow is remarkably stable. He tells her that working hard on oneself is commendable, but he warns that the problem arises when such effort is directed the wrong way. Yoon Ha, puzzled, asks him what he means by the wrong way. Mo Baek explains that the training she is doing does not focus on strengthening the body, bones, and muscles, but instead resembles performance martial arts, which may make the body athletic and well-shaped, but fail to provide any real foundation for effective martial arts. Yoon Ha feels confused and struggles to believe what Mo Baek is saying. As she always thought the martial arts she learned from the Yoon clan were foundational techniques, she begins to suspect that what she learned was merely preparatory training meant to groom her for a political marriage, as her family often did. Her frustration and anger grow as she realizes she had been blindly following a path laid out for her without understanding its true nature, and she bitterly admits that she only now understands the truth. Feeling disappointed, Yoon Ha asks Mo Baek what she should do now. Noticing the signs of discouragement in her eyes, Mo Baek advises her to start learning external martial arts, explaining that relying solely on the Samjae Gong technique will not suffice. When Yoon-ha asks how this could be beneficial, Mo-baek explains that many warriors focus only on internal energy and techniques, neglecting the importance of external martial arts. This, he says, is a critical mistake, because if the body is not strong enough to withstand the pressure of internal energy, the fighter will not be able to use it effectively. He elaborates that the priority should be on strengthening the body by training the muscles and bones through external martial arts. Yoon-ha, feeling inspired, asks him to teach her. However, Mo-baek responds that it is too late in the night for training, and it would be exhausting. Undeterred, Yoon-ha insists once more. With a sigh, Mo-baek relents, telling her that he would have preferred she go to sleep, but he agrees to teach her on the condition of complete commitment. He feels somewhat satisfied, knowing that her inability to fully control her internal energy makes it easier for him to teach her, and simplifies the process. He asks if she is truly ready, to which Yoon-ha enthusiastically replies that she is. Mo-baek instructs her to focus, and follow all his directions from this point forward. The next morning, Mo-baek gathers the trainees and explains the new training schedule they will follow. The day begins with external martial arts training in the morning, followed by breathing and internal energy techniques. After lunch, they will focus on basic movements and defensive techniques using shields. The trainees listen attentively and respectfully agree to the schedule. However, Sunjin notices that their instructor has become increasingly unusual, especially since he now arrives at the training grounds before them and has begun planning rigorous schedules. Sunjin struggles to understand the sudden change in their instructor's behavior. Mo-baek then calls Dan and Yoon-ha forward before the lesson begins, surprising them with his specific request. He explains that their level is still far below the rest of the trainees, so they need to focus on body-strengthening lessons first. Taking Dan aside, Mo-baek points to a set of small shields, explaining that they were specifically designed to suit him. He tells Dan that every defensive movement with the shield will help build his body's muscles, though the effort will still be challenging due to his frail physique. He assures Dan that the weight of these shields is suitable for his size and instructs him to train slowly, focusing on basic movements. Dan enthusiastically thanks his instructor and immediately heads to the shields to start training. Mo-baek then turns to Yoon-ha and informs her that she has reached her physical limit due to the previous day's training. He advises her to participate as an observer today, explaining that some lessons are better learned by watching. Yoon-ha feels disappointed because she had wanted to train, but she reluctantly agrees out of respect for her instructor's orders. Mo-baek announces the start of the first training session of the day, which consists of intense and grueling exercises. He instructs them to lift a massive boulder and lower it until it touches their thighs and shins, explaining that this exercise is designed to enhance external martial arts and comprehensively strengthen bones and muscles. He warns them not to use internal energy during the exercise, emphasizing that he will not forgive anyone who attempts to cheat. Yoon-ha observes quietly, impressed by the intensity of the exercises and Mo-baek's professionalism in guiding the trainees. She notices that despite their extreme exhaustion, the trainees persist with determination and silence, without a single complaint. This realization leads her to acknowledge that what she learned in her family was merely performance martial arts, not genuine training aimed at building strength. Mo-baek continues giving instructions, advising Dan to extend the shield further, spread his feet, and straighten his back properly. He also encourages the rest of the trainees to exert more effort and lift the boulder higher, warning them not to look like white chicks. The trainees are shocked when they learn they will need to repeat the exercise an additional 100 times. They attempt to appeal to Mo-baek for leniency, but he remains strict, warning them that if they don't start immediately, he will double the repetitions to 200. Moreover, failure to finish on time will mean missing lunch. Meanwhile, in the main wing of Tam Ryong, the key figures of Gyo Ryong-gwan gather and discuss a mysterious man who appeared like lightning and acted recklessly, akin to a violent thunderstorm. One of them remarks that they've heard of his skills and talents but finds his appointment to Gyo Ryong-gwan unusual. Doyle responds, mentioning that he once met someone named Nabom Mang with the same name. Another member wonders aloud if they've heard the name Mo-baek before but cannot recall where. Doyle, feeling uneasy, tries to brush it off by saying that many names sound alike these days. He knows that only a few people in Nabom Mang are aware of the full truth about Mo-baek, and it's natural for other instructors to be unaware. Doyle points out that good instructors focus on teaching the next generation, demonstrating innate combat skills, which is why they prioritize Gyo Ryong-gwan. Their conversation is interrupted when Mr. Myung asks about theji preparedness for the upcoming Hatoji tests. The leader of the Gam Ryong team comments on their good fortune, having a large number of promising young trainees. He adds that some individuals who were not expected to join Gyo Ryong-gwan have already done so. Doyle shares his excitement about the event and expresses high expectations. Sang Kyung-moon, leader of the Waryong team, notes that his team also has a fair number of exceptional individuals, including a surprisingly talented newcomer this year. Doyle responds enthusiastically, saying that this is great news and highlights the abundance of talent poised to lead Gyo Ryong-gwan. He emphasizes the importance of being fully prepared for this year's Grand Hatoji event, with about 2 months remaining. When asked about the participation of the Great Dragon team in the Hato Festival, team leader Mo Young responds that the skill level of first-year students is well known, and their participation remains uncertain. However, he promises to notify the instructors. Still, he expresses doubt about whether they will join. Someone points out that there's a trainee from the Tang family, hailing from Yeongnam, in the Great Dragon team. They suggest that this year is worth the attempt, especially after a 4-year absence, and insist that participation is necessary this time. Mo Young asks if they truly believe this, knowing that these particular individuals always try to belittle him and embarrass him. The real issue lies in the fact that the instructor of these trainees is Mo-baek himself, who is considered a walking disaster. Doyle interrupts the heated discussion, emphasizing that all the students are talented and have great opportunities ahead of them. He stresses the importance of preparing thoroughly for this year's Hadoji festival. However, he secretly worries that Mobayek might stir up new trouble before the festival concludes. Meanwhile, Instructor Mobayek is engrossed in training the trainees, explaining that the three-way technique may seem like mere hand strikes, but mastering it unveils a martial art brimming with potential and limitless applications. He points out that the direct strike they are practicing now is part of this art, assuring them that once they master the basic movements, they will be able to develop diverse and derivative techniques. Mobayek continues observing the trainees, noticing that Yunha's posture and technique are the best among them, as he had anticipated. While he previously thought that Dan's talent and determination were the strongest, Yunha now stands out as the most impressive. He shouts at the trainees to motivate them further, reminding them that they are still far from mastering the level required to execute derived techniques. He emphasizes the importance of focusing on the basics and working harder. Turning to Dan, he instructs him to stand straighter and apply more force to his grip. He also points out Sun Jin's stance, directing him to adjust his footing and correct the angle of his leg, which was positioned incorrectly. Smiling, Mobayek feels a sense of satisfaction and pride in the trainee's efforts. However, his moment is interrupted by a worker who enters the training ground to inform him that the equipment he had ordered is ready. Mobayek thanks the worker, who leaves shortly after. Mobayek calls the trainees and tells them to take a break and head to the open courtyard near their dormitory. Everyone is surprised by this sudden instruction, but Sun Jin suggests that perhaps the instructor simply wants to give them a break. However, upon arriving at the courtyard, they are stunned to see a large array of heavy equipment, weights, and iron tools. Byung asks Mobayek about the purpose of the heavy equipment and whether they would really need it. With a sly expression, Mobayek explains that the stone they had been using for training has its limits, and starting tomorrow, they will be using the new equipment. The trainees are shocked and puzzled, seeing the equipment as more akin to torture devices than training tools. Dan nervously comments that he might leave the training completely drained. Mobayek, with a mischievous tone and a sinister look, replies that since Dan still has the energy to talk, it means they haven't been pushed hard enough, and they can start using the equipment today. As time passes and the new training regimen begins, Sun Jin remarks on how quickly the days are passing and notes the sunny beauty of May, a perfect season for training and outdoor activities. Dan counters by saying that while the weather may be lovely, his entire body is in pain. He adds that the metallic equipment has even begun appearing in his dreams. Yunha advises him to eat well, as his body needs energy to cope with the intense training, also emphasizing the importance of stretching exercises. Sun Jin comments that the instructor has recently been dining at the northern wing, seemingly enjoying delicious meals while leaving them buried in exhausting training. Dan suggests that since the instructor hasn't arrived yet, they could go to the southern wing. However, they hesitate, fearing another confrontation with the troublesome Gamryong Dai group. Sun Jin asks Dan if he's genuinely afraid of that annoying group, adding that even if the instructor isn't with them today, they have nothing to worry about as long as he, Sun Jin of the Tang family, is there. The other members support him, saying that nothing bad could happen, and that the Gamryong Dai group isn't particularly special. Uncharacteristically, Dan feels a deep sense of unease that day, which proves justified when they encounter the troublesome group they were discussing. This time, the group includes an especially irritating individual, Dang Chu. Dang Chu begins mockingly, asking why the handsome prince of Chengdu, Sun Jin, is here, remarking that while he'd heard about his joining the Great Dragon Unit, this is the first time he's seen his face. Sun Jin turns toward the source of the voice and recognizes the provoking figure of Dang Chu, which annoys him. Nevertheless, he approaches him. Dang Chu expresses his surprise at not having met Sun Jin before, adding that it's remarkable how his family sent one of their members so easily to a place like the Great Dragon Unit. Sun Jin replies that there are various reasons for that, while Dan quietly explains to the others that this person seems to have a personal connection with Sun Jin. The others speculate that Dang Chu might belong to the same Tang clan. Dan notices the discomfort on Sun Jin's face and comments on how his expression reveals his irritation. Indeed, Sun Jin's visible frustration confirms his displeasure at encountering Dang Chu in this place. Dang Chu begins introducing Sun Jin to the first-year students of Gamryong Dai, naming Namgung Jihyo and Namgung Jiyu from the renowned Namgung clan, Chung Wujia from the Mudang Ba clan, and Young Ho Jun from the Huasan Ba clan, who are also members of the Great Dragon Unit. Dang Chu then presents Sun Jin as a member of the famous Tang family, and the others greet him with respect. However, Dang Chu continues his provocative remarks, implying that Sun Jin might prefer underhanded methods and clings to things that ultimately hold no value. He mocks Sun Jin, suggesting that external training and the three arts martial techniques taught in the Great Dragon Unit are the best he can achieve. Sun Jin and the others grow increasingly annoyed, and Sun Jin wonders if Dang Chu is deliberately trying to provoke them into a fight. Dang Chu coldly replies that he was merely greeting them and has no intention of causing trouble. Sun Jin, losing patience, tells him to leave if he has no business there. Dang Chu laughs maliciously, asking why Sun Jin is so easily irritated. Sun Jin completely ignores him, walking past as if Dang Chu doesn't exist, and tells his group to leave since there's no point in staying. However, tensions escalate when Dang Chu deliberately bumps into Sun Jin without apologizing, standing there with an air of indifference. Sun Jin's companions notice the tension and realize that the relationship between the two is at its worst, with Dang Chu intentionally trying to provoke him. Dan suggests they leave quickly to avoid further conflict and calls for Sun Jin to follow. But Dang Chu doesn't stop. He continues with his taunting remarks, this time targeting the 7th Squad members. He directs a comment at Yunha, sarcastically saying that her refined appearance doesn't suit a place as ridiculous as the Great Dragon Unit. Yunha feels irritated but remains silent. knowing his goal is to provoke them. However, his comments succeed in angering Ryong, who warns Dang Chu to stop his insolent behavior. Sun Jin also warns Dang Chu not to address his teammates in such a manner again, stating that they are unaccustomed to his irritating style. Dang Chu responds mockingly, claiming he was only being polite and didn't mean to offend. Namgung Jiyu intervenes, attempting to defuse the situation, admitting that Dang Chu's words were inappropriate for someone of his standing. Sun Jin, well versed in the customs of the Namgung clan, knows that its members cannot challenge the Tang family, even if the speaker is the youngest of the clan. Nonetheless, Jiyu approaches the 7th squad members and apologizes on behalf of his teammate. Dan, however, questions why Jiyu is apologizing, pointing out that the one who made the offensive remarks should be the one to apologize. Dang Chu retorts arrogantly, asking who Dan is to determine what is acceptable or not. He ridicules him, saying that his skill level fits the Great Dragon unit perfectly. This angers Sun Jin, who demands that Dang Chu apologize immediately for his rude comments. Dang Chu stubbornly refuses, saying he will apologize when pigs fly, and begins gathering his internal energy. He challenges Dan to prove if he's only good at talking. In a flash, Dang Chu moves at an incredible speed toward Dan, so fast that even Namgung Jiyu cannot stop him. He closes the distance with astonishing speed, leaving Dan frozen, unable to defend himself or move, and on the verge of taking Dang Chu's attack. At the last moment, Sun Jin rushes in with his full internal energy, intercepting the attack and shielding Dan. Sun Jin tells Dang Chu that he has crossed every line this time, and that his actions are reckless. Dang Chu, seething with anger, demands that Sun Jin step aside, claiming this is between him and Dan alone. Sun Jin refuses, pointing out that Dang Chu was the one who initiated the insults, and asserting that, as the leader of the 7th squad, he will not allow anyone to harm his teammates. The two collide with their internal energies, leading to an intense confrontation. Meanwhile, in the northern wing of Tamryong, Coach Mo Bayek was enjoying a new dish from the menu, filled with joy as he hadn't tasted xiaolongbao dumplings this delicious in a long time. After finishing his meal, he considered taking a short nap before returning to his trainees. However, he suddenly paused, sensing an emanation of internal energy belonging to the Tang clan, which aroused his curiosity. He wondered who could be the source of this energy since he knew that Sun Jin was the only member of the Tang clan present in the area, yet what he felt now was not solely Sun Jin's energy. In the combat arena, the fight between Chu and Sun Jin intensified. Chu expressed his astonishment that Sun Jin was able to block his strike using only the triple force technique, adding that he couldn't believe the person fighting him now was the same Master Tang Sun Jin. Sun Jin responded angrily, demanding silence and pointing out that the triple force technique surpassed all of Chu's absurd techniques. Chu replied arrogantly, saying that even under such circumstances, Sun Jin behaved with arrogance and false dignity, despite having no chance of defeating him. He then drew his weapon and told Sun Jin that he would now destroy the triple force technique that he boasted about. Chu's weapon was a long, segmented whip imbued with immense internal energy. Sun Jin was taken aback by the new weapon and Chu's sudden escalation to such a violent level. The audience was also shocked at Chu's use of such a deadly weapon, commenting that Sun Jin was now in grave danger. Even Namjoon Ji-yu saw Chu's actions as reckless, and believed they would cause further problems, potentially placing everyone in another precarious situation. Chu prepared to launch a fierce attack on Sun Jin, challenging him to block even one strike of his powerful style with the Spirit Serpent Whip. Sun Jin felt the danger and didn't know how to evade or counter the attack. He realized that in his current state, he wouldn't be able to face the segmented whip, especially after employing the triple force technique. This might force him to resort to using the Tang clan's martial arts in the end. As the whip approached him at an alarming speed, he had to quickly think of a way to evade the attack. Sun Jin employed a special technique of his own, known as the Tri-Sun technique, Step Back to Origin, which allowed him to skillfully and swiftly evade all of Chu's whip attacks. However, he knew that he was relying solely on his high internal energy, which wouldn't sustain him at this pace for long. Additionally, the martial arts he had learned from the Tang clan were not being executed correctly, and it wasn't the right time for trial and error. Yet, he conjured an idea in his mind that might succeed if executed properly. Sun Jin's friends watched the fight from afar with anxious and frightened expressions, terrified that Sun Jin might get hurt due to Chu's violence and recklessness. As for Dan, he felt powerless and wanted to intervene, but he realized that his interference would hinder Sun Jin more than help him. Chu mocked Sun Jin's movements, saying that the most renowned member of the Tang clan looked like a child trying to walk for the first time. He added that even a worm, if placed in this fight, would move and fight better. Continuing, he said, "If you're so happy rolling left and right, I'll show you how I play with you like the worm I've likened you to." Then, he launched a swift and sudden attack. Sun Jin was startled by the complete change in the whip's movements, making them harder to avoid or predict. Indeed, he was struck repeatedly, until a powerful blow hit him directly on his right shoulder. Moments later, he received another strike that caused a deep wound on his side. As for Chu, he acted like a madman, attacking with his weapon in every direction without restraint, declaring that he wouldn't let Sun Jin escape his grasp this time. His attacks were so violent that Sun Jin's clothes were torn, revealing the marks of cuts and bruises on his body. At that moment, Sun Jin couldn't think of anything except that Chu's new transformation technique exceeded his ability to endure or counter it at his current level. The 7th squad had reached their limit, unable to bear watching their comrade being struck so brutally. Dan shouted passionately, saying he would join Sun Jin to take down Chu together, but Byung stopped him, stating that this battle was solely between Sun Jin and Chu, and no one could interfere. Dan angrily responded, asking what he meant by saying the fight was just between them, adding that he wouldn't simply watch while Sun Jin suffered. If everyone else would stand idly by, he wouldn't, and he would put an end to this farce himself. Byung replied, telling him to stop thinking so naively, pointing out that even Sun Jin, the strongest among them, had ended up in such a dire state. Dan felt upset, but ultimately realized that Byung was right, and that any intervention from them now would only make things worse. Chu yelled at Sun Jin, telling him he should have stayed quiet and kept his chest puffed out only if he could back it up with action. Just as he was preparing to deliver more lashes, someone intervened to stop him. It was Ji Yu, who told Chu that the fight was over, and the result had already been decided. Ji Yu looked at Chu with an uncharacteristic angry glare, making Chu uneasy as he realized he had gone too far and lost control. Chu reluctantly stopped fighting and left the area without showing any concern for the critical state he left Sun Jin in. Meanwhile, Sun Jin could barely stand, breathing heavily, his body trembling from pain and exhaustion due to his depleted internal energy. He felt surprised that Chu had finally stopped his attacks, and gradually raised his head despite the bleeding and deep wounds he was suffering from. Despite his miserable state, he felt grateful for having faced Chu alone without putting any of his team at risk. Sun Jin thought that if he were still in the Tang clan, he wouldn't have been able to endure this battle. He also realized that the grueling training he underwent under Mo Bayek's supervision had borne some fruit. However, he eventually collapsed, prompting his team to rush toward him, concerned, asking about his condition. Dan supported him, saying he would carry him, though every movement or touch to Sun Jin's body caused him pain. Byung glanced back and saw Chu and his team leaving without showing any regard for Sun Jin's condition. He shouted angrily, asking where they were rushing off to so quickly. But Sun Jin interrupted, thanking Byung for managing the situation well. Byung replied that he only did it for his sake, not wanting things to escalate further. Sun Jin followed Chu's team with contemplative eyes, convinced that Bailey Bing was stronger than all of them, and even Chu couldn't face him. At that moment, Coach Mo Baek finally arrived, sarcastically commenting that Sun Jin didn't look good at all. The trainees were surprised by his arrival and asked him when he had come. He replied that he had been present since the moment Chu drew the segmented whip. Dan angrily asked why he hadn't intervened to stop them from harming Sun Jin. Mo Baek responded that it had been a childish fight between students, and it would have been ridiculous to interfere after the fight had already started. However, he noted that the priority now was treating Sun Jin's injuries. Sun Jin agreed to go with the coach for treatment, and Mo Bayek instructed the trainees to take Sun Jin to the treatment room quickly, without causing any delays. Dan, with tears in his eyes, asked Sun Jin to climb onto his back so he could carry him. Sun Jin agreed, but asked Dan to stop overreacting. Dan carried Sun Jin, and the team hurried to the medical room while Mo Bayek watched them run. Mo Bayek felt that things were becoming more intriguing, and realized he needed to learn more about the Hado Ji mentioned by the other instructors. At sunset, Coach Mo Bayek gathered the trainees again and addressed Sun Jin, asking if he didn't feel anger and frustration for being beaten by someone like Dang Chu. He then told him that next time, he needed to be filled with rage and a desire for revenge, because if his eyes remained dead like this, he would never succeed. He remarked that Dang Chu was indeed an irritating and unethical person, to the point that even he, as a coach, felt disgusted and couldn't remain neutral toward him. Mo Baek added that it was natural for Sun Jin to feel distressed, angry, and frustrated with himself, but he reassured him, saying that he only needed to harness these negative emotions to strengthen himself and prepare for revenge. In this way, all his negative feelings would dissipate. Sun Jin was surprised by the coach's mention of revenge and asked him what he meant. Mo Baek responded by saying he had found a good opportunity for him to regain his dignity, and asked if he had heard of the Hado Ji Festival, explaining that this festival was a group combat event exclusively for first-year trainees at Ju Ryan Guan. He further elaborated that the event was like a tactical group training exercise simulating wartime combat conditions. The trainees were intrigued by his words and asked for more details. Mo Bayek began explaining that the Hado Ji Festival involved group combat, where the members of each team would be gathered and sent to a designated mountain. There, they would wander during the day, fighting other teams they encountered, while fighting was prohibited at night. After 7 days of this pattern, the last team remaining in the mountains would be declared the winner of the festival. Dan was surprised and asked the coach if he meant they would fight for an entire week. Mo Baek replied that the event was originally created to remind students of the two great wars, and how Wuxia heroes faced harsh challenges to achieve victory, albeit indirectly. He then addressed them sharply, asking if they wanted revenge and to restore their dignity within Ju Ryan Guan. Sun Jin responded with determination and resolve, saying he wanted to participate in the festival to take revenge on Dang Chu and hold him accountable for what he had done. Dan enthusiastically declared that he wanted to help Sun Jin get his revenge, and wouldn't let him face this battle alone, saying he would join him. He then asked the rest of the team for their opinions, and both Byung and Yoon Ha agreed, confirming their decision to join the battle. Dan became excited and shouted that their enemies should prepare themselves because they would show no mercy. Byung replied sarcastically that Dan was the one he was most worried about. Mo Baek interrupted with a smile, saying that since they were all in agreement about participating in Hado Ji, their training would become tougher, and their future lessons would be harsher to ensure proper preparation. His eyes gleamed with a devilish sparkle, hinting at strict plans. The next day, Mo Bayek began an intense training regimen for the 7th Squad that was unrelenting. The trainees found the training far harder than they had anticipated, and Sun Jin could barely keep up. Byung commented that compared to this, Their previous training sessions were just child's play or warm-ups. At one point, Dan collapsed from exhaustion and complained to the coach that he had developed a cramp in his leg and couldn't continue. Mo Bayek responded coldly, saying that if he was breaking down from such simple training, the future would be much harder, and he needed to endure because it was only the first day. The trainees were shocked by the coach's harshness and complained to him that the physical training was too difficult and they couldn't sustain it all day. Mo Bayek replied that if that was their opinion, he would take them directly to the final exercise of the day, which was the 5th day league fight. The students were stunned when they heard they would be moving straight to the combat phase, especially since their opponent would be Coach Mo Bayek himself. They objected, pointing out that the skill gap was far too large, and that their physical condition was already drained from the prior training. Mo Bayek responded calmly, pointing out that war didn't consider the physical state of soldiers, but rather exploited it. However, he reassured them that he would fight them at a level that suited their abilities, so there was no need to worry. The students were shocked by Mo Bayek's insistence and found no way to argue or change his decision. As night fell, the coach headed to the mountains where the Hadoji event would take place, where he began counting the number of first-year students and ensuring that the size of the mountains would be sufficient to accommodate everyone. While doing so, Mo Bayek reflected on the day's training sessions with the 7th squad, wondering if they would be able to participate successfully in the festival. Although the team had never fought together before, Mo Bayek noticed that they displayed a strong sense of teamwork. Their tactics were impressive, particularly in coordinated attacks, and their synchronization was remarkably seamless. They could divide roles among themselves smoothly, without needing to speak or exchange signals. The coach realized they were not just spoiled children, but possessed unique skills and strategies that could give them a real chance at success, especially since the festival relied heavily on group effort. However, Mo Bayek's thoughts wandered to his own teacher, whom he had been thinking of repeatedly as of late. He speculated that the reason was the presence of 5 students under his training, though he didn't truly consider himself their proper mentor. Since arriving at the mountain, he had been sending messages to his teacher, but hadn't yet mustered the courage to meet him in person. Burdened by a past tainted with blood and disgrace, he lacked the bravery to face his teacher or to speak candidly with Yoon Ha. Mo Bayek looked up at the sky, saying he would visit his teacher only when the scent of blood had faded from him, but he wouldn't dare do so until then. With the first light of dawn, Mo Bayek quietly left the mountain. When he returned to his quarters, he was surprised to see Sun Jin standing and waiting for him. He asked Sun Jin why he was there. Sun Jin replied that he had been waiting for him for a while, but his expression seemed uneasy. Hesitantly, Sun Jin told him that he had something he wanted to discuss. Mo Bayek suggested they talk somewhere else and took him to a quiet place for tea. There, he asked Sun Jin whether he was truly ready for revenge and if he was willing to risk his life to achieve it, noting that he only had a month and a half to prepare, a very short time. Mo Bayek tried to calm him, saying that he shouldn't worry too much for now and should relax and prepare for the intense training that would start the next day. The coach's tone shifted as he seriously asked Sun Jin what he wanted to talk about. Summoning his courage, Sun Jin began by explaining that Mo Bayek likely already knew he was the son of the leader of the Sa Tang clan and the 4th son in the family. He shared that the family included 3 individuals known as the Tang Sam Jun, the top 3 fighters of the Sa Cheon Tang clan. He added that his eldest brother and younger sister were among the 3, while the 3rd was Dang Chu, whom they had seen the previous day. Mo Bayek expressed his surprise, pointing out that there was something strange about this. He remarked that while Dang Chu was talented and strong, he didn't deserve the title of Sam Jun, especially in a prestigious family like the Tang clan. He added that Dang Chu's personality was deeply flawed, full of shortcomings, and it didn't make sense for him to be considered one of the top 3 fighters, unless he had been included simply to fill the spot. Sun Jin agreed with Mo Bayek's assessment, but clarified that Dang Chu was, in fact, his cousin. Despite being born after him, they were the same age. He explained that when his grandfather was the clan leader, Dang Chu and his family were part of the direct line. However, when Sun Jin's father became the leader, Dang Chu and his family were relegated to being part of the branch line, following the Tang clan's system of marginalizing anyone outside the direct lineage. Since then, Dang Chu had been marginalized and deprived of many privileges that were reserved only for the direct line. Sun Jin explained that this shift occurred when they were 10 years old, and from that time, Dang Chu's personality changed, making him more violent. Because Sun Jin was part of the direct line, he received privileges and learned a great deal, even though he wasn't as talented or strong as Dang Chu. Nevertheless, he achieved nothing noteworthy, and was a major disappointment to his family, to the extent that they nicknamed him the dumbest member of the Tang clan. Mo Bayek responded to Sun Jin, saying that his level wasn't as bad as he thought, and asked if he hadn't felt a difference in himself while fighting Dang Chu. Sun Jin admitted that he did feel that things were entirely different from when he was in his family, noting that in the past, he wouldn't have avoided a single strike, and would have suffered humiliating defeats. Mo Bayek continued, explaining that there was a saying, "Success comes with patience." He added that the Tang clan's combat techniques might not have been suitable for Sun Jin from the start, which is why he couldn't use them properly. He pointed out that the fact that Sun Jin went from being unable to dodge any strike in the past to being able to avoid one after just 2 months was clear evidence of his improvement and progress. He assured him that if he truly had no talent, he wouldn't have been able to master the triple force technique, gather his internal energy so effectively, or even endure the intense training he had been subjected to. Mo Bayek emphasized that Sun Jin and the rest of the team had great potential, and if they couldn't trust themselves, they should at least trust him and his vision of them. He urged Sun Jin not to dwell on other thoughts for now and to rest, as the upcoming training would be as grueling and deadly as ever. The next day, Mobayek prepared a variety of equipment and weapons, surprising the students who asked about their purpose. Mobayek responded that they surely weren't planning to participate in the Hatoji festival with their bare hands. He explained that all the trainees from Wolongdai and Jamryongdai would ascend the mountain with their own weapons, while they, considered the weakest among them, thought they could succeed using only their fists. He added that they needed weapons like the shield technique developed by Jijal Myung, noting that it was effective but required the use of both hands. Dan observed that the shield was very light and asked Mobayek if he had modified it himself. The coach replied that he had indeed modified it, so it could be held with the left hand while using a sword in the right hand. He explained that the shield was designed based on Jijal's technique, while the sword came from the Three Talents sword technique, and they complemented each other perfectly. Byung raised his hand and said that the sword style he learned at his school suited him very well, but Mobayek firmly replied, insisting there would be no exceptions and that everyone would be required to learn both techniques together proficiently. Byung questioned the necessity of learning these techniques, to which Mobayek explained that each combat style was an independent art, but it could also function as a combined technique. He elaborated that the shield style developed by Jijal Myung was fundamentally designed to work within combined techniques, as was the Three Talents sword technique. He added that this martial art was considered a basic foundation taught in most sword schools. Nevertheless, Byung argued that the Three Talents sword technique alone wasn't sufficient. Mobayek sensed that Byung had significant pride in his Jangnam family and their sword techniques, and an idea struck him. He drew his sword and said that the quickest way to clarify the matter was through a duel rather than a lengthy explanation. The students were surprised, and Byung was taken aback when he realized that Mobayek was challenging him to a sword match. Mobayek firmly pointed his sword at Byung and demanded that he fetch his sword and join him in the arena. Mobayek's tone grew serious and intense, and his eyes radiated confidence and challenge as he told Byung to prove the skills and techniques of his esteemed family that he so proudly boasted about.